Okay, everybody, everyone looks like they're done eating, so, and it's 7 o'clock. So, let's call this Budget Committee organizational meeting of the Silver Falls School District to order. Debbie, please note attendance. Okay, and before we get started, I just want to say thanks to Sodexo and Sue-Ann. They had a great taco bar for us. Got us all bellies good. Our bellies are all full, relaxed. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so the first item is to elect a board chair, not a board chair, but a chair of the budget committee to run this. Do we have any nominations for budget committee chair?
I'll nominate Aaron Cook. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for board chair. Any others? Okay, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, congratulations. Let's shift over and then you can take over and elect the vice chair and carry on from here.
All right.
And I'm not Tom's.
Yeah.
All right, next item would be to elect a vice chair. So do we have any nominations for the vice chair position?
Nominate Jacob Clotfelter.
Any
I'd like to
seconds?
nominate Ron Bella.
Sorry, Ron Bella. Do we have a second for
Second.
Jacob? Okay. Second for Ron? Okay. Okay, so all those in, we'll take Jacob first and then we'll do Ron second. All those in favor, Jacob, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. So, do you have the votes?
Aaron, you probably ought to, just ought to ask for votes for each, and everybody gets one vote, whether it be Jacob or Ron.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
they would both be voted on at the same time.
Okay. So, just ask for yea votes for either or.
Yeah, I think probably ought to be a hand
Okay.
vote.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go back. Let's we'll do a re-vote here. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands for those in favor, first for Jacob and then for Ron. So all those in favor of Jacob, please signify by raising your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 8 for Jacob. All those for 9. Excuse me, Betty Jo. 9.
Sorry.
All right, I'll vote for Ron. 1, 2, and 3. 3. Oh, sorry, let's keep up your hands. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and 4. Okay. So with 9 votes, Jacob gets the vice chair spot.
You only voted.
All right.
Thank you
All
for
right.
your consideration, appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So now I'll hand it over to Andy Belando.
Yeah, I'll keep my greetings brief, but I wanted to thank all of you, first of all, for your volunteerism and supporting this very significant role as budget committee members, board members. Of course, you're continuing your role as board members, but as you also make up 50% of the budget committee, and having community participation by you as board members and you as budget committee members is central, and in fact, from my perspective, is critical to our operation as a school district. So thank you very much, and welcome to another round of this. For those that are returning, I want to say welcome to Charles Baldwin and Aaron Cook, the two newly appointed budget committee members appointed by the board in the fall. And we look forward to working with the two of you and all 14 or 13 of you. We have nearly a full house tonight, which is great. I know it's a little cozy where you are, but I also think that this is a great meeting place and a perfect opportunity for us to inform you about what things we hope to look like for 2018 and 19 school year. So thank you very much, all of you.
Great, thanks, Andy. I'm going to pass it over now to Steve Nielsen to review our duties and responsibilities of our budget committee.
Good evening. I apologize. I don't like reading things. I just like to chat, but I do need to read the roles and responsibilities. So again, thank you as well. Really appreciate your service on this committee. The budget committee is charged with holding one or more meetings to receive the budget message and the budget document, which will receive the budget message at the next meeting. 2 is to provide members of the public an opportunity to ask questions about and comment about the budget document. And 3, approve the budget document as submitted by the budget officer or as revised and prepared by the budget committee. The budget committee does not change staffing levels, salary schedules, or negotiate salary contracts. It is not the committee's role to adjust policies or priorities set by the board or to add, delete, increase, or decrease programs. However, the budget committee does test the reasonableness of the budgeted line items to meet the priorities and goals of the district as set by the board and takes input from the public on the level of services planned. The budget committee can make changes to any of the line items in the budget to meet the goals and programs outlined by the district with the revenues projected. The appropriation level, usually done at the function level, such as 1,000 instruction or 2,000 support services, as approved by the budget committee and adopted by the board, has binding authority on the administration. The administration is given the authority to transfer funds between line items below the appropriation level by policy DBK. We think of the budgeted amounts in the line items below the appropriation level as recommendations and guidelines to the administration. Transfers of funding at the function level or above must go to the board for approval by resolution. Individual budget committee members have no special authority to request information or direct staff to provide reports. The budget committee as a whole may, by committee vote, direct the administration to provide additional reports, information, data, or presentations to help the budget committee better understand the budget. The budget committee plays a large role in providing communication with the community about the budget process and limitations within which the district works. Committee members develop a good understanding of the district's fiscal constraints and the programs funded and are able to explain those things to their friends and neighbors throughout the community. The committee also provides an important additional conduit for input from the community of their priorities for the district.
All right, thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Steve, for a thorough description there. I'm going to keep it with you to review the revenue forecast and to discuss the allocation system for distributing dollars to schools and programs.
So in the notebooks you received, if you turn to the revenue tab, that's where we'll start. And it might be helpful to take the first page out and lay it side by side with the second page, which is the state school fund estimate. So it's actually from our chair, it's kind of a dream this year. Odd number years are kind of we sit at this meeting in April and there's a lot of unknowns. And in an even number year, most of the time, it's a lot more predictable. Legislative year like last year, we were sitting here still what turned out to be 2 months away from even knowing what our state school fund allocation was going to be as they were developing and approving the state budget. And we also were in negotiations with both of our associations at this time last year. So we didn't know a lot. This year we have the state budget still at the $8.2 billion level. As it turns out, they funded based on a 50-50 split rather than a 49-51, which that was a change, but that's okay. The other big piece for us is enrollment, obviously, and we've been blessed in this district to have, at worst, stable enrollment, if not slightly growing, and we talked quite a bit about that with our enrollment work group presentation last month at the board meeting. So that's been great. PERS rates are staying the same for 18-19 as they are in 17-18. They'll go up again for the next year, 19-20, 19-21 cycle. So all the knowns are there for us, and so it makes it a little more simple. By state law, the Oregon Department of Education must put their first state school fund estimate out for every school district in the state. And so that's what that second page in the revenue tab is. That's on the ODE website. Anybody can access that for all 198 school districts in the state. You can see it's $8.2 billion at the 50-50 split. And so if you go down towards the the bottom of that page, you can see our total formula revenue on the bottom left-hand side. First projection is almost $37 million, and those funds make up all our property taxes and the state income tax that comes through the state school fund, as well as the transportation grant that's part of the state school fund as well. So that number correlates directly to the first two line items on our revenue projections. If you add those two numbers together, that comes to the $36,921,000. Now keep in mind that this particular estimate, it's updated, we'll get another one of these updates before the fiscal year is over, but remember that a state school fund year lives for 27 months, and March 1st, 2018 for the 18-19 year is just the start of it. So it'll live all the way through next year and well into the year after that while they wait for audited financial data. And the amount per student, as you can see over on the bottom right, total formula revenue per extended ADMW right now is $8,125. It's a little bit different for every district depending on where they're at. Some districts are reimbursed 70% for transportation like ourselves, others are at 80% or 90%, and there's some other little factors involved based on those types of factors that can change that amount per student number. So every district's just a little bit different, and every time we get an update, that number will be a little bit different. And they also, every quarter throughout the school year, update our enrollment figures, which is there in the middle. Remember that the state funds us based on the higher of the current year or the previous year, whichever is higher. So when you look at this particular estimate, our current, and this is through second quarter ADM reporting, average daily membership to the state, our extended ADMW right now for 17-18 is 4,544. Now as a reminder, our district enrollment, including the charter schools, is about 3,800. When you add the additional weighting factors for IEPs, ESL, and other factors, poverty, we get up to just over 4,500. You can see for 18-19, the estimate is at 4,533. Now I expect both of those numbers to actually go up, but right now they would fund us based on this year's number and not next year's number, because this year's number is a little bit higher. And again, that will change as well. So that's our baseline for this budget is this particular ADM of 4544 at 8125 per student for next year, and that's how you get to this $36,921,000 number. Now, it's important to go through this because this provides over 90% of our general fund revenue, as you know, and obviously a stable economy will ensure that this number stays about where it's at right now. We're fortunately now in our fourth or fifth year since pulling out of the recession, where we haven't had state economic forecasts come out every quarter and they take a hit on that number like we did between 2008 and 2012. I kind of look at the budget with kind of the big three. You have the state school funding and the stability or instability there, the PERS rates, and enrollment. So if you have all three going bad at the same time, you're in big trouble. If 2 out of 3, it's not fun, and 1 out of 3 is manageable. If you have all three kind of go in the right direction, then you're in pretty good shape right now. And knock on wood, the PERS rates did jump up this year, but they're the same next year. As a result, on the expense side of the ledger, we were able to keep our average teacher cost at $97,500. It jumped from the 93 up to 97.5 this year, but we kept that number the same for this next year. So that was another kind of a known and stable factor for our principals to be able to budget on. The rest of the revenue page outside of the state school fund, you can kind of go through. There's just some other pieces. The high cost disability grant also runs through the state, but it's not tied in directly to the state school fund in terms of our amount per student and that formula, but it's a carve out. So if you look at the third page on this revenue in the revenue tab, This is always the first page that comes out when they send an update out before the district pages, and you can see how this $8.2 billion budget works between the 2 years and what all the different carve-outs are before they get to the allocation that we just went through. So part of that is high-cost disability grant, which is the state funds IEP students as an additional weight up to 11% of your enrollment or your ADM. Then there's a pool above that where you can get some more, but it's capped based on how much the other districts have. So if you have, say, 14 or 15%, you might get about 13% double weighted. Then after that, they have a pool of high-cost disability money to be shared across the state for students that cost over $30,000. And I think right now they're able to fund about 50% of that allotment. So it's definitely helped. I think it's about the third or fourth year that's been in play. And then there's just some other miscellaneous revenue dollars. There is some transit dollars that come through the ESD. We do get services through them directly, but we also get dollars that are passed from the state through the ESD on behalf of the component districts that come through to the district. And last but not least, we do have a projected beginning fund balance. So that makes up our total projected general fund resources available, and that's important to note that here tonight all we'll be hearing about is through the presentations our general fund revenue and expenditures. Our next meeting we'll have another document that will show the rest of the funds. Then you can go through the school requirements here. This is both for school programs, district level programs that actually are helping fund and service the schools in other ways, like the special education department. It's funded at the district level, but personnel are placed out of the schools, obviously. I mentioned the charter schools earlier. It's always important to remember that the state accounts their enrollment with ours, passes that state school fund money through to us, and then we credit both charter schools with their state school fund revenue. It's at a lesser rate than what we're at. It's 80% of that, of not even the 8125, but the general purpose number of 7786 based on their enrollment. So basically it comes in as revenue and goes out as an expense as well. Beyond that, you can see we get to the bottom, we end up with a projected ending fund balance of 7.8%, which the board goal is 6%, at least 6%. Invariably, our actual ending fund balance usually is above that. For example, June 30th, 2017, our actual ending fund balance was between 14 and 15% of general fund operating expenditures. One important delineation here is that while this number looks maybe a little low, especially compared to where we're ending up at, the school requirements here, we'll look at the school allocation sheet in a moment, but the school allocation numbers include monies that the schools, they could spend, but they do reserve some of their own money as well. So that would be really added to that would be in addition to what would be here at the end, because it's in here it's assuming that it's all being spent, but it's not. So that's one of the major factors as to why there's a difference. So with that, let's make the transition to the school allocation page, which is under the allocations tab, and it's in a landscape format. So I know many of you have seen this before, and there's some that haven't, so I will go through it in detail. The methodology behind the allocation sheet has not changed. There is an addition, and I'll get into that in a moment. But as a reminder, if we start on the top left, the base of the funding for the schools is based on a 3-year average enrollment. So in our district, we use a very similar methodology as ODE in terms of if a school is in a declining enrollment environment, we don't want that sudden change in a given year to hit them and then have to make some radical changes the very next year. So if they're declining, they're going to get the benefit of maybe a couple of higher years than the average. If they're going up, they're not going to get a big spike up either. It just kind of averages it out, and it seems to work, I think, pretty well for all of our schools. It's also important to note that when you look at the average enrollment, these are October 1st numbers. We're at just over 3,500. Again, this does not include the charter schools. Well, we know that our total enrollment without charters is actually closer to 3,700. Well, the numbers here are still counting kindergartners as half. We do have a separate column like we started when full day K started down at the bottom for full day K to make the kinder funding whole. So we've kept that way. There are some minor weights that come into play for the smaller schools that add to their weighted enrollment. And then there's a funding factor over towards the top right that's a little bit different based on if it's a K-8, a K-2, a middle school, or a high school. And then there's the total weighted enrollment. Now, if you take any number in the very right-hand column, top right, and multiply it by the number in the box on the bottom left, $5,530, that's how you get to the per ADMW allocation for each school. That amount per student went up just a little bit. It was $5,500 even last year. It went up by $30, but we also did not increase the teacher cost this year. The classified cost went up a little bit per position. So right there is just over $20 million out to all the schools. In addition, once you get past the base, there's a reconciliation that takes place in the next column where once the audit is over, we do a reconciliation of what they had estimated their carryover to be to what it actually was, and if their carryover was actually more, we'll credit the schools with the difference. And then the principals and I work together on the next column, the third column. It's estimated 2017-18 carryover. Basically, that is, in last year's budget, most of the schools did plan to have reserves or contingency. And based on where they're at right now, 3/4 of the way through the year, we kind of looked at that and said, okay, where does it look like they'll land? And so we have an estimate for each school in terms of what their carryover may be at the end of this year, and that's given credit to them in their allocation. So you can see just based on this number, you can see where some of that additional ending fund balance could end up being at the end of this year or next year. And you'll see it in their budgets for this year, what they're planning. And then the next column is the admin fixed cost allocation, which has always been there for principals and secretarial time. And this is the new piece, is a counseling allocation. We talked quite a bit about one of the budget goals this year is to try to add more counseling throughout the district. There are schools obviously that had counseling and some schools that didn't, or schools that just had very little. And so I won't steal too much thunder there. I think that the principals will be talking about that on each of their budgets, but we went through kind of a formula based on was it 500 to 1? 450 to 1 is where we landed on that, to try to get, based on the average teacher cost, out to the schools, and so each school is getting something there. And then the full day K column there to make kindergarten funding whole that started a few years back. And that brings you to the new total. So you can see after it's all said and done, it's about 25 million of our 40 that's of our resources that's going straight out to the schools. And then obviously you have the reserves and then the departments and those types of things that we'll be talking about departments at our next meeting. But that's the gist of it. And so each principal gets their allocation sheet, and they work with their staff. We meet, we go over things and make sure it all balances, and they'll be sharing that with you tonight. Is there any questions on how this sheet works or any of the calculations?
I have a question.
Sure.
If I'm not mistaken, wasn't it in the 15-16 school year that we went to full-day kindergarten? And so
That's right.
all 3 years reflected here would be
Mhm.
full-day kindergarten, so I don't understand the
Why we
allocation
still
of
have-
0.5.
Why we still put it down here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually started this by getting rid of this column and putting it up here. The problem I ran into was the funding factor. The second to last column on the top. I would have had to make it different for almost every school to try to keep them whole.
Sure.
And so I thought, you know, I just didn't really have enough time to try to to make it where I'm gonna go back to the drawing board on that, because ultimately that was my plan. But
Okay.
that's a great observation.
We actually discovered that some schools would have realized lesser revenue as if we were to combine it all
Yeah.
into one. So I think some revisiting, like Steve suggests, Jacob, of the funding factor needs to occur. So this still, putting it in as a separate column, is able to provide apples to apples comparison over the course of the 3 years.
Okay.
So can you talk a little bit more about how the funding factor is determined and what the future might hold for changes that you are alluding to?
Well, the thought behind it is you can see that Robert Frost and Mark Twain are both at the 1.0. So the thought being that the K-5 is doesn't cost quite as much theoretically than, you know, being able to provide the middle school programs and the high school programs of different subjects, a little more complex, a little more layered, you know, and I think these funding factors have been this way for quite a while. haven't
They have for a number of years, and they're based upon a full analysis that was done at the time, Jennifer, probably 15 plus years ago, and specific to our school district, but there's some significant merit behind it, and that is that essentially it costs more to operate a middle school per student, and because of things like PE and supplies and equipment, and it definitely costs more at the high school level when you think of CTE courses, applied sciences, arts, and so forth, that there was a funding factor that was developed, so everything was based upon the elementary K-5 funding factor of 1.0, with middle school and high school having slight increments above that based upon the analysis that was done. But I think it's time for that analysis to happen again unique to our school district, because if we truly are, getting back to Jacob's question, going to use 1.0 for elementary students, then it surely doesn't take into consideration full-day kindergarten. So if we are going to really recheck or recalibrate, is what we have to do, 1.0 at the elementary level, then there needs to be some adjustment for full-day K, and then of course taking in the realization of middle school and high school costs.
And that's one of the problems too, is we have K2, we have K8s. And so we're providing the extra half teacher plus EA time, which is clean, in the full day K column for however many classes they have of kindergarten in that particular school. Whereas if we try to apply it here, then you're dealing with kindergarten at different structured schools that have different funding factors. And you know, when you look at the counseling allocation, for example, you can see the one school that didn't get any counseling allocation was the high school. So yeah, if you were to then apply the kinder and the counseling, obviously this ratio would look different down on this line, but I agree with Andy. I think it's a good time to look at that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thanks.
Okay, good. Thanks, Steve. Thorough as always, and I really appreciate all the info.
Thank you.
Andy, if you can just hit on what our budget goals and priorities are for this year.
Sure. And again, I'm going to let principals discuss their priorities specific to their schools. And that's the first comment that I want to make, is that we operate on a specified funding formula that Steve just, I think, did a great job of describing. But it also takes into account, I think, the effort that has occurred over the years to be able to allow our community schools to be able to create priorities for their schools based upon the allocation that they're given. That's something that the community asked us at the time, and actually based upon information that we've received over the last number of years, it still is a priority for this school district, for the schools to have some specific priority ability and decision-making ability for their schools within of course, the priorities established by the district and the goals established annually by the board. So if you take a look at the second page, or the last page under the agenda tab, you'll see that the board approved goals for the for budget development for this school year, and they are oh shoot, those are a copy of last year's goals. So a few of those goals remain the same. So they are maintain the 2017 average class size averages, school and staffing program allocation, which maintain current levels of staffing, budget ending fund balance, a minimum 6% of the general fund revenue. And Steve just shared with you that this the proposals, the worksheets that you're receiving equate to 7.8%. Application of the district strategic visioning plan is still placed in there. And the last one, that's no longer, that's not part of the 2018-19 budget goal, but rather is the two additional goals, one being the approval of counseling services for our elementary schools. The board had a very healthy conversation about whether that should be specific to the rural schools or all schools, and the board agreed that it should be for all elementary schools. And so that's another budget priority, a goal that's highlighted in this budget. And then the last one being a priority for safety and security measures in each one of our schools. And again, board conversation for that, it was just specific around things like addition or completion of security fencing installation at all of our schools, the schools that don't have them fully in place, security entrance improvements, point of entry security, electronic locks, and camera installation at those schools as priorities. And so you'll see a budget that reflects the addition of all of those as well. As far as other priorities for the district, keeping the goals in mind as these are being processed, I wanted to comment on a couple of other things, and you'll see more of this and hear more about it on May 10th when you receive the full department budgets. But in addition to counseling, you'll also see some district-wide application of curriculum purchases, which we have to do every once in a while, and we've really, you'll see there's a pretty significant increase in that department this year, especially when it comes to science, math, and social emotional learning curriculum that we're required to apply in our school district, especially at the elementary level. You'll also see some application of increases in communication. And I did want to comment on the use of reserves. The 7.8 budgeted amount that we're proposing, again, is higher than the 6%, and we believe that over the course of the year, as a result of a variety of reasons, that it will land higher than that, but then that's really unknown because we don't know exactly what the needs are going to be for the year. And as an example, we could have things like multiple employees that are required to use, let's say, multiple days of sick leave, or we have some major facility issues or costs that occur over the years. So while the budget addresses those as best as possible, we have to budget contingency and reserve in order to best address that. But the 7.8%, again, is a priority in our district, also helps address, in anticipation of the PERS increases that we fully anticipate a year from now when the rates go up again for the next biennium. And as a school board, I think our school board has done an incredible job the last few years of being able to maintain some reserves in order to best address the PERS rate increase. The current budget is reflective of decisions that were made literally 3 and 4 years ago about those priorities. And this budget continues to address that as we head into the 2019-21 biennium for PERS rates. So that's another priority. You'll also hear some principals talk about that tonight, I'm certain, about their reserves, because in addition to the district reserves to help offset that, principals are savvy enough to understand that for their smaller budgets and site-based budgets, that in order to preserve the staffing levels in anticipation of changes in staffing, especially if there are bubbles of enrollment going through, that they do some sort of smaller level reserve planning in order to do just that, offset the cost of PERS or unanticipated costs for their buildings. So I think that's very smart on their part to do that. And finally, the last comment that I want to make is that you have received in this notebook, and this is for clarity, and these sounds like maybe more semantics than anything, but I want to be real clear that these are actual worksheets. These are worksheets, are proposals by the school principals and departments that you're receiving this evening. The actual budget document which is essentially presented to you by fund and function and codes, doesn't look anything like this. But for many years, we've used this process simply because it's easier to understand. It provides the principals an opportunity to talk about what's going on in their buildings, and generally the Budget Committee has always appreciated that. If we were to give you the actual budget, there'd be no delineation of things like what's happening at Silvercrest or Prattam or Scotts Mills, and that would be very confusing to you. So I think this is a great approach, allowing us to be able to do that as well. So anyway, lots of information to be shared, and I just put in my letter to each one of you. School budgeting is sometimes difficult to understand because of the complexities to it, but please ask questions and help clarify tonight, so we can make certain that you're fully informed before you leave this evening and on to the next meeting. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thanks, Andy. We're going to get into now the presentations by the principals on their individual budgets. Before we do that, after that, we'll have time of audience with visitors. But before we get into that, I just want to kind of go over the guidelines for some of our public comment time. So, Silver Falls School District Budget Committee has established the following guidelines to accommodate public testimony. Number one, should obtain recognition from the chair before speaking. Give testimony from the designated place right up here. Please keep comments concise and avoid repetition. Be specific about what it is you want the Budget Committee to do. You're encouraged to provide each Budget Committee member with written copies of your testimony. In order to accommodate all who want to speak, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And a group appearing on the same topic is asked to designate a primary speaker and may be granted additional time. So we'll have the audience with the visitors after our presentations. So with further ado, Ms. Jorgensen.
Yeah, me. First. I'm presenting on Scotts Mills. Okay, myself organized. All right, excited to go first. Usually I get the end because I'm in Robert Cross and Scotts Mills, and it's been alphabetical. This is kind of exciting for me. A little bit of pressure, but I can handle it. So in creating the budget at Scotts Mills, we provide opportunity for staff input. We also give our site council and PTCC groups some time to share their priorities or goals for them for our school as well as looking at data and what we need to best support our school. Our goal, really overall goal for us, is to prepare students to be successful students in the next grade level. So we're looking at how to make sure kindergartners are ready for first grade for second, and then most of all that our 8th graders go to Silverton High School ready to be successful students. So when doing that, looking at that, that's how kind of we focused our budget goals this year. Steve, I might need you to help me with some of my FTE stuff because it's a little confusing because of the PE grant, which is a blessing, yet it makes things a little confusing. Last year, we budgeted for the PE teacher and then ended up getting the grant, but not the full amount for the PE teacher. So we ended up paying a little bit of it, so it was like we paid 0.2 something and then the state paid some, so it was a little confusing. So when you look at our licensed staff, and specialists there, it looks like we had a big decrease, but we just sort of moved some down and then the PE grant part. So we do have a full-time teacher who's 0.2 classroom, 0.8 PE. So Helen Club is partially in the 7th and 8th classroom, and then the rest of the time she's teaching PE. So she's allocated in both of those areas. Looking at our classroom staff, we have 6.75 licensed classroom staff this year, and we'll continue that into next year. One note is, as the 1.5 FTE in the 7th and 8th grade, the district supported our large middle school this year with a 0.5 science teacher, which has been wonderful. Our teachers have done a great job of teaching science at Scotts Mills in the self-contained setting. There's something about a science class in the STEM lab, actually doing like science labs and stuff that has been so beneficial for our kids. We know that our students don't do great going into at the high school level. Freshman science has not been a huge, hasn't been the highlight for some of our kids because they haven't had some of that experience in the lab and stuff. And this year's been really great. We have Maureen Powell, who also teaches at the middle school, and so she's been a great asset to us, and we get to keep her next year on our own their own allocation to continue teaching science, not her necessarily, Mr. Davison. A science teacher at Scotts Middle School, sorry. I just want to clarify what it was. Sorry. Not Mrs. Powell, but a science teacher at Scotts Middle School. Just want to clarify. So also, as you can see, our kinder number next year, we already are at 20 kids, and that is all kids from Scotts Middle. Those are not transfer kids, those are all in our community, which is really exciting. It's exciting for our school. In the specialist, you'll see the counselor. I know it was already talked about, but that is wonderful. We are very excited. We already have lots of ideas in our mind of how that person is going to support Scotts Mills. It's a 0.4 for our population of students, and so that's 2 full days a week that we'll have a counselor in our building. Very exciting. There's lots of things that counselors are trained for that principals and teachers are not. So we're really excited for having a counselor in our building.
How is that going to work district-wide? Will there be, counselors will be shared, I assume?
Scotts Mills, Silvercrest, and Evergreen, because Silvercrest and Scotts Mills are both 2 days a week, Evergreen's 1 day a week, so we're going to pull together to hire a full-time to share between the 3 schools, which will be, it's a little bit easier to hire a full-time person than 0.2, or 0.4. So we're gonna, that's our goal, is to work together to share a full-time. Pretty much everything else there goes through the same. You'll notice just the head teacher position, that's increased a little bit. That's based on the collective bargaining agreement, extra duty salary guide there. Also, we have the extra duty other, and you'll notice went from $500 to $5,000, and that was on purpose. The goal there is this year Lisa Garrett has done our TAG program. She's half-time intervention specialist, reading in Title I. And she's going to, this year she did our TAG program on a time card because it just made more sense than hiring her for another .1 or whatnot, because it doesn't really work as well as just doing a time card. So when she's doing testing or working with TAG students or working with teachers on the DPIs, she does a time card, so this will help support her. Also, last year we reduced music, and this year we were blessed to have a donation to continue music, but that donation didn't continue into this year. So we lost our donation. The donor just decided not to, which that's their right, which is a bummer. But we do have that $5,000. We are also going to continue, try to do some musicians in residence programs, try to bring in musicians to do 6-week activities, or bringing in somebody for our Christmas program. We'd really like to, our holiday program that we do is try to bring in someone to help get that going, and so it's not all on the teachers. Our PTCC is also, we've already been talking to them about having them help us with that, and so if we can, I mean, it's always great to find volunteers or donations, but if we need, paying someone is an option as well. So that money is really earmarked for those, both music and TAG, there in our extra duty column. Going through pretty much all the other below the are pretty much the same. We did add some money to the counseling, to the guidance services because of the new position. I want to be able, that person to be able to start being able to purchase some things for their space they're going to be working in, and different things to help support the students. And so just putting some funds there to help get that position going. All right, and then at the end, the transportation services. This year, or actually last couple of years, we've gone on some really great school-wide field trips where we went to the Oregon State as a Beavers Beyond the Classroom event with the women's basketball team, and then we went to the Evergreen Aviation Museum, the whole school, and that would just be nice if we kind of set aside some funds to do that, so it's we can get those field trips going without having to start asking for parents for money right away for those. And that's been in transportation kind of adds up quickly, so it's nice to have a little bit of money there. My contingency column there, we put $10,000. That's really some funds, which is exciting to have, because as you can see, we haven't had that. We didn't have that before. And that money is there in the event that something happens and we need a bunch of iPads go kaput because the charging card doesn't work or blows them up or whatnot. And so we have to, just having some money there to work with. If we need to do some more extra duty time, then we have some money there to work with. The goal is to keep it, not use it, but it's just nice to have it there. And then reserve for future years is $60,000, which is a lot, it seems like a lot, but when we, as Andy talked about, preparing for the future, looking at our larger class sizes coming up, sometimes the money doesn't come as fast as the kids, and you end up with a situation where you have really large class sizes. And so our goal is to kind of start bringing that fund up. I remember when I went to Scotts Mills, Dale Koger said, here's the budget, there's zero money, like everything was spent and there was nothing left over, and I was like, fun. And he had to cut a teacher at that point. So it's exciting to have a little bit of that money for reserve. So in the event that, the PE grant goes away, and we're required to teach PE, we don't have to lose a part of the teacher. So it's really good just to, even though it's not quite a teacher yet, we're working on saving up some money so we have that reserve for the unknowns, which is it's a good feeling to have a little extra there.
What kind of space do you have for counseling? Most of our small schools don't have much
Well,
of
we
this
have,
space.
it's an official room, we call it the tweener room. It's between the office and the library. And so we're gonna kind of try to see if we can turn that into a counseling space. We also have the mod in the back, the two mods, and one set up for music and the other is the specialists, like the speech pathologists and people that come in, they kind of use that. So we can use that as well. So we'll find a space. We're just so happy, I'll give up my office if I have to. I'll take the tweener room, she can have my office. I'm very content, we're excited to have a counselor, so that'll be great for us.
The increase in kindergartners, is that, you said it was all Scotts Mills, was that move-ins or?
I don't know. There's a lot of
They're building more houses too.
We have quite a few new houses being built in town, and quite a few siblings of families that have, older kids, so. Move-ins, but no transfers yet, which is, man, a couple of years ago, we were like looking for transfers, like.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so we're really excited, that's good. 20 is great because that starts to build that straight grade.
Yeah.
So you have room for more, did you get transfers?
We would take a couple more. We would, we wouldn't really know till, because usually you get kids moving over the summer as well. So, we would not turn them down.
You really don't know about your kinders until you get kindergarten roundup.
Yeah, and our
That's
kindergarten
kinda where you
roundup's
base your
next
numbers.
week, and some of the great things about Scotts Mills is everybody so connected, and so our secretary knows every family, and she's like, she has a list, and it's like, they'll all be here on next Thursday for roundup, and then we'll see this summer, September rolls around, and there's always more that come in, so.
It's good to see that.
Can I ask you a question about your classified staff? The
Yeah.
ESL assistant is 5.5, and so that's hours per day.
She's 5.5 hours per day, funded by Scotts Mills, but the district ESL supports it another hour and a half, I think, a day.
So that's in addition?
Yeah, in addition, so she is 7 hours.
Oh, so she's 7 hours.
She's 7 hours, that just doesn't reflect it because there's an hour and a half that's district funded for her.
And the licensed teacher for that program is funded through you? Or through
Nope, to the district. Yep, so we have, Lori Wire comes in, I think she's 1.0 at Scotts Mills, I believe, so she comes in a couple times a week, kind of depends on the schedule, and then Rosalba supports her, our ELL assistant supports her when she's, the students when she's not there. And she's been new this year and a great addition.
There's a separate ELL department program page that Mark will present at the next budget meeting that have those staff.
So I have a quick question for you. Steve, when we were going over the each school's sheet that has their individual information on it, on Scotts Mills, it says estimated 2017-18 carryover $44,000, and the year prior was none.
Right.
So we won't find that out if there's a carryover until.
Right, we won't know what the exact number is, that's the estimate as of now.
Okay.
And as Kristen mentioned, so Scotts Mills is one of the 4 schools that have had the PE grant.
Right.
And this is what, the 3rd or 4th year. When we were budgeting last year, we were 90% sure that was going away, and then they revived it in the last hour in the legislature.
So you're on pins and needles every year for that. Correct?
Yeah, right. So as she mentioned in her budget last year, she actually budgeted for, so with the grant, the state pays for the salary.
Right.
And the district then covers the benefits. And last year we were in a transition year, we were going to say, okay, the school will pay for the salary, the district will cover the benefits, and it's on the school. Well, she budgeted for the whole thing here,
Right.
and then the grant came back, so she ended up using dollars in the not subject to carryover section. And so the reason that this 44,000 appeared here, and essentially she had more money to work with in this year's budget, is because we gave a credit for this year for money she didn't end up needing to use or staff to hire on her own budget, that can now be pushed forward because the program survived, so.
So for this coming year, you're still on pins and needles, you don't know if that's.
No, we're in the same biennium, so
So it's still
we've
the same.
confirmed that
Okay.
as long as we're meeting our requirements, that they, now, it's survived, but as Kirsten mentioned, it did cover the full salary, again, not the benefits, but the
Right.
salary for this year, and next year, it was about maybe 80 to 90% of a salary, so the school is responsible for the small part of the salary that's not being covered, and the district's covering the benefits. But yeah, after this next cycle, I mean, we do have to assume, unless we hear different, that it would be gone in the next biennial cycle.
And we have legislation that mandates that we have PE. And is that, do we have until 2021 for that?
Yeah, then that's where, the increased requirement for minutes per day will be required at the elementary level. I believe it's K4, K5, I don't recall exactly. And then what the incremental growth over the next few years until it's fully mandated at the K8 level with minimum instructional minutes per day for physical education in all of our elementary schools.
But we don't have to have specialists teaching it. So some of our small schools, the teachers teach that too.
Right,
So
so-
you don't always see a specialist.
Yeah, it's just kind of nice to see that number
Yeah.
carry over, and I wanted to see what was covered or what wasn't covered, you know, and get the clear.
It's a very good point. For a place like Scotts Mills or other schools that are able to bank some reserves, it's going to make a difference a couple of years from now when
It
the
will.
PE mandate comes in.
Yeah, because there's probably going to be other mandates that are coming down the pipe that I'm sure that we don't know about yet. So so Steve, this is for you real quick before we get into all the other principles, because this might answer my question with the other principles. So the estimated 2017-18 carryover, almost every single school is going to have somewhat of a carryover.
As it looks like right now, and there's a couple that are close to the line, but
You're
most of them should.
pretty, okay.
Just a comment on the PE specialist situation. I'm assuming that your teachers get prep when there's a specialist that comes in.
Yes,
So that
yes.
is very
Yes.
helpful when
Yes.
there is an actual specialist.
Yeah, so when teacher, that is their official prep for the day, so the key time.
I have a question about your contingency fund. You have actually two funds for contingency as I read it. You have a reserve for future years contingency fund, and then you have a contingency fund. What is the difference?
The contingency fund is for next year, am I correct? The goal is to use
So,
that next year.
right,
Let
so
Steve answer that.
that's a great question,
Yeah.
Charles. The state has two reserve types or buckets. The contingency is money that we could use next year in 18-19 if she needs it. Her goal is to not use it, and that's how it's appropriated. It's appropriated. And reserve for future years, I mean, when we take all the schools, whatever they have in reserve for future years, as well as at the district level, we're not planning on using that next year at all. And even if we decided we wanted to or needed to, we can't, because it's not part of the appropriation.
Well, it's not a contingency fund for this budget.
The first line item is, but the second line item is for, down the road.
I don't understand why it's called.
It's unappropriated ending fund balance is the official state-given title to that, reserved for future years, beyond the year that we're budgeting for.
On the contingency fund itself, who makes the decision when there's a contingency?
Well, the school, at the school level, she would have the authority to say, and she would talk to, to Andy or myself and say, it looks like we're monitoring this on, daily, weekly, monthly basis, and if we're running where it looks like it's going to go over, we'll say, well, you did budget a little contingency, what does that look like? And she would have the ability to you know, to put that into action. From a district level, the contingency fund as a whole, if it looked like the entire district as a whole was going to exceed our requirements that don't include the contingency, we would have to do a resolution with the board if the district as a whole was to go into that category.
On counseling, I wasn't around when the board had its discussion about counseling. Apparently there's been some wish by the board to have it. What issues are counselors addressing?
Lots of them, like mental health needs that students have, and a lot of stuff like, so like for us, I feel like some of the stuff that we deal with on a daily basis, like the friendship stuff, like he was my friend yesterday and now he's not my friend today, and it kind of has that, and it comes back into the classroom with, and then the teachers having to deal with it. That's something that a counselor can really help with. Social groups. We have, when I was at Robert Frost, we had a counselor, and so one of the things they worked on a lot was attendance. Like the kids who were struggling, a counselor is a good like check-in, check-out person, and just kind of depends on the day sometimes.
But the counselor will be a part-time person?
The counselor will be part-time at Scotts Mills.
So when an issue arises in the school that the counselor can help with, it may arise at a time when the counselor is not available.
Very true. That's very true. So that would be something that I would deal with as a principal, or sometimes we have a head teacher as well who could handle that at our building. If it's an emergency, I've called like Butte Creek counselors right down the street. I've called Debbie Scott and said, hey, we need you now at Scotts Mills. So relying on the other or counselors in the district, but sometimes things have to wait, I guess.
Charles, it's a very similar formula that we use for multiple positions in the district. We do the same thing with our school resource officer. We do the same thing with principals. As example, Kirsten is a half-time principal at Scotts Mills School because that's what the enrollment warrants. We also do that with behavioral specialists and other positions in the district that in special education, simply because of the size of the school. It's a uniqueness of Silver Falls. Ideally, I'd love to be able to place a full-time counselor at Scotts Mills School and a full-time principal at Scotts Mills School, but for 169 students, that's not possible from a financing standpoint. But otherwise, getting back to your question, the counselors, from a priority standpoint, especially for our rural schools, because they haven't had them before, are to prioritize the coordination of student service teams, to monitor Section 504 students, which have needs that in order to be successful within the school. They will be facilitating threat assessment teams, suicide risk assessment teams, sexual incident response teams, things that is on the shoulders of the principals now, that we have some behavioral specialists that can handle that, but generally at our rural schools, it's principals. Those will be the prioritized tasks for the counselors when they're in the schools. Counseling and guidance, things that Kirsten referred to at Robert Frost, which is currently the case, which a full-time counselor, that's 410 or 20 kids there, is something that may occur, may not occur at our rural schools. I think it just depends upon how it all sorts out.
Do counselors make home visits?
They can, not alone, but yeah. I've gone home visits for counselors before.
Is it common that they do?
I think it probably depends on, it depends. I don't know, I can't really speak. I haven't had a counselor for a few years, so I don't know.
Yes, they do.
They use the phone.
They use the phone conferences and
What programs don't you have that you want to have in your school for your students?
Goodness.
What's your number one priority? What would be your top wish list? If you can give me a top 3, maybe. You can get back to me.
Can I get back to you on that?
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm just focused on this right now.
Okay.
But I can definitely, when you come visit.
I will come visit you, yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to get it while the
Yeah,
entire
no.
board is here.
Yeah, I can get back to you.
But that would be great.
Off the
And-
top of my head right now, I'd have
Yeah,
to-
that's fine. Okay, so I'm just gonna
Yep.
forewarn the rest of the principals here. I'm gonna be asking the same question of you when you're up here, so if you can start mulling that over. That would be great.
Can I make a quick comment before you leave?
Yeah.
Sorry. You're really the hot spot.
When you go first, you know.
Last place, I'm really looking for you.
Just so I get dinged by these guys. I'm sorry.
I just want to make a comment that I think it's hard to know that you're going to lose music this year and see a $60,000 reserve, which could cover like half music. It's hard to see that. But I understand that thinking ahead
Yes.
and capacity and PE is
Yeah.
going to be mandated.
Yeah.
I understand that you're building that, but I
Yeah.
just want to make that comment that that's
Yeah,
hard
no,
to see.
I absolutely agree. That's when Steve and I, because initially it wasn't that much until we kind of figured out the PE grant from last year's situation. I was like, I could do involved with $60,000. So I agree with you, but looking in the future, if we have 20 kids in kindergarten, and because the funding doesn't come, and then all of a sudden you're cutting you've got 37 kids in second grade.
Right.
That's hard. That's, like music was great for that 1 year, but now we are short a teacher. And so having, I think it gives us principals and the district a lot of peacefulness, knowing we have a little bit of money there. So if those things happen, we're prepared versus panic if we have to. So, but yeah, thank you. No, thank you.
So no music program for the fall, for this next year?
We do not, no. We
No.
do not.
Is there anything else that you absolutely don't have as a program? Like, well-rounded education?
So
music,
really,
PE?
we have music, music's the one thing we're not gonna have,
Okay.
else. We feel very
Okay,
happy about what we have. So it's
great, okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for your presentation.
All right, Leslie Roach from Robert Frost.
Okay, so to develop this year's budget at Robert Frost, we went through our priorities and focus as a staff, and with my parents on my committee and leadership team, and we have everything focused behind the district mission and goals, and we're really focused on student growth. We had multiple discussions and surveys to develop this budget, and we have prioritized small class sizes and access to specialists as we develop this budget. So you'll see we have 5 grade level teachers at each grade, and we also have a full-time counselor, a librarian, we have 0.33 FTE of music, which is music 1 day a week for all students. We have a full-time PE teacher, and we are adding 0.5 FTE towards PE so that we will have PE every day for all students, which will meet the new requirements. We are maintaining our educational assistant time, and you'll see we've shifted some monies around in our various different supply type budgets to put it all in the same supply budget in order to reflect more accurately what we're actually spending the money on. When you go through the budget manual and you look at all those codes and you're like, oh, well, this one's for furniture and this one's for library books and whatnot. Mostly we buy a lot of paper at elementary school, so it went into the budget where you're supposed to be buying paper from. And then one of the other major shifts is we, for the last 3 years, have been leasing laptops, and we have finally completed that lease and purchased the laptops, and now that money will go into purchasing Chromebooks for our students. So otherwise, our budget is pretty similar to last year.
The laptops, is that the increase here on computer hardware?
Yes. It's changing from the lease account to purchasing, yeah.
On the first page, what's the difference between last year I see remediation and licensed staff and now it's intervention? Is that the same thing but just different words?
It's the same thing. I thought remediation should have been changed to intervention, and so I asked you to change it.
Got it, all right. And then it increased a little bit?
It did. We are increasing a little bit so that we have just a really small, like 0.025 amount to go towards TAG, so that we have someone who can support our counselor with actually pulling TAG kids and administering the Raven, which is the required test that all 4th graders take and whatnot.
What percentage of your students are TAG identified?
I think right now I have 5. It's very, very small at the 3 through 5 grade. the first year that students are really start being identified is after they take the Raven in the 4th grade. And so they just are starting the process at my school. And when you hear from Brett at the middle school, he can speak more to K possibly, and electives.
Why is that? Why do we wait so long?
It's just the process. They take the Raven once at Mark Twain Elementary, and then they take it a second time in 4th grade. And so you just want multiple data points when you're doing identifications.
So we don't start intervening with them until 5th grade?
No, we meet the needs of all of our, we attempt to meet the needs of all of our students. And so, for example, at Robert Frost, we have 30 minutes every day that we call Power Up. And all students go about math or reading, either for intervention or for extension. And so we have an amazing math specialist in our building who works with 3rd grade advanced kids and a few days a week, and she pulls them out of the classroom and they do lots of fun math games and extension activities. And then a couple of days a week, she works with the kids in math that need intervention and they need to go back and do more skill building. And so right now, we are able to do both. It's just not always identified as TAG for students at this grade level.
I'm sorry, can you tell me about the leasing of the laptops again? I think I was writing something else while you were saying that.
Sure.
So you were leasing laptops.
Over the, before I was hired,
Yeah.
there was a lease agreement made for several laptop labs. And you lease it so that you don't have such a big upfront cost.
Right.
You pay
Yeah.
over a series of years. So those leases are now finished and we own those laptops.
Okay.
And so we've just shifted that money from the budget line
Yeah.
item for the lease into the computer line item so that we can purchase student devices.
And do you have an idea of what devices you're wanting to purchase? To
Right now-
facilitate to kids?
Yeah, right now in grades 3 through 5, our district is looking at Chromebooks. We currently have 5 Chromebook labs at Robert Frost. And we are looking to increase so that we can eventually be 1-to-1.
I notice you use a different term on previous year budget. You have remediation, a position for that, and intervention. What's the difference?
It's the same thing, it's just an updated term. Remediation is something that we just we don't use that word very much in education anymore. We intervene in order to meet students where they're at, to catch them up to grade level, rather than remediate, which is just a more old-fashioned term. So, just updating the language.
And I have a question about the positions you budgeted for music. You have a third
.33 FTE.
.33 person for that. And you had that last year.
Yes.
Last year in physical education, you had one full-time person. This year you seem to have a person and a half.
Yes.
So,
We are increasing PE, FTE, so that we are meeting the new state requirements.
the requirements in the state have imposed a new standard for you to meet?
Yes.
I see. Can you tell me how you handle arts in general? Do your teachers handle the arts program and the music program partially?
We have a music specialist who's fabulous that we share with the middle school, and she teaches music once a week to all of the students. And then arts are taught by the teachers in the classroom, and we have a variety of very fabulous, talented teachers that teach a variety of different art projects. And we participate in the community art display every year. We have a lot of students and teachers who submit every year for the community festival, and so that's how we do art at Robert Frost.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you had to cut field trips. Do you fund them like through parent teacher?
We didn't actually cut them, they just we weren't spending that money Previously, they had been using that money to pay for buses, and we have found some really wonderful grants that we're able to use. We partner with Oregon State University's forestry education program, and we go to Hopkins Demonstration Forest pretty frequently, actually, and that they cover buses. And so it's great to find partnerships with organizations around us that cover transportation. Yeah.
I have one other question. Your budget does not seem to include a contingency item.
That is correct,
Why is that?
because I spend all of my money. I want my students to grow, and so I have budgeted every single dollar so that my students are growing.
What do you do when a contingency arises?
So far, that hasn't happened, but we also have, like you see my supply budget, I have a pretty hefty supply budget, and I also have support in other ways that I pull from. So I have a title budget every year based on the amount of free and reduced students that is totally separate from this, and that funds other areas in my building. And so I have different revenue streams. Is that a good way to explain that? Okay.
So would it be fair to say that when you craft your budget, you craft it in a way that leaves some contingency in each item, rather than putting it into a separate item called contingency?
That may be correct, yes. That may be a good way of looking at it.
That's true, she usually doesn't spend everything that's budgeted in there.
I
Sorry?
did.
She usually does not spend everything that's budgeted in there, and does not appear that she will be this year, so. But
I'm
usually-
familiar with this budgeting technique, having served in the Army.
Yeah.
Leslie, I just wanted to say that there were several things you said tonight that seem to reflect that you have really tried to craft your budget so that it reflects your actual usage, and I really want to say I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So I have a couple more questions for you. So we've now allocated for counseling $88,725 for Robert Frost. Is that correct? So you had full-time counselor prior to that allocation. So what are you planning on doing with that? That way, and I'll ask for data at the end of the year next year.
Well, part of the total calculation for Robert Frost changed, and so that was how I was able to add a half-time PE teacher, is that I had already had a full-time counseling position, and so with the board being able to fund the counseling position at all of the K-8s, that impacted me in a positive way. So I was able to use money that I previously had at my building just for counseling.
Oh, and you shifted it.
And I shifted it.
Okay.
That actually brings up a good point that I failed to cover in this, was that, so at Butte Creek, Robert Frost, Mark Twain, in the middle school where they already had counseling.
Yeah.
3 of the schools had a behavior allocation for several years that was part of the admin fixed cost allocation. So for example, at Robert Frost, Mark Twain, I believe it was $43,000.
Okay.
And that was pulled out of the admin fixed costs and added to the counseling. So if Robert Frost shows $88,725, really it was a net gain of about $44.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. And did that, okay. I guess I'm not sure of all the schools that have counselors.
Well, Butte Creek had a .8.
Yeah,
You had
and
a
they're
1.0.
different.
Different.
And Mark
Okay.
Twain.
Different levels of counseling at each school. Okay.
So it wasn't an increase at the schools that already had.
It allowed for
Just allows them to move their money around.
Yeah.
a little bit, but at Butte Creek, it would have funded, it would have definitely been able to get them from .8 to 1 point,
Okay.
but also maybe give some flexibility in other areas.
So you have you said a hefty supply. With your goal to get more technology in your school, do you see that? I mean, is that what you would want?
Yeah, yes,
Any technology to
eventually.
reduce your supplies so you can shift your money?
And so one way that Drew, our technology director, has
Yeah.
explained technology to us as administrators is that you need to think of your Chromebooks, your iPads, your laptops.
Right.
Those are still, you're going to have to replace those. You have a
Right.
replacement cycle. And so
Right.
as I'm increasing my numbers of technology in my building, every year I'm trying to increase, but I'm also trying to make sure I'm budgeting to
Right.
replace as well.
Right. I'm trying to get your supplies down. Okay. Oh, my question. Do you have a top 3 wish list? What don't you have in your school as a program that doesn't exist or that you'd like to improve on significantly for the students?
At your next meeting, I think you're going to hear from Jennifer Hannon about some curriculum that I very much, and I think most of the principals would share with you, are the social emotional learning. Curriculum is really important for our students in order to just work on, we need to directly teach self-regulation to students. And that's new for some of our teachers, and so having something to lean on and
Right.
to help them develop with that would be really important.
Okay. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Thanks, Leslie.
Thank
Thank you for your presentation.
Great cuts. Mark Twain.
Okay. At Mark Twain Elementary School, we have a little bit of a difference in configuration, similar to Robert Frost. They're 3rd through 5th grade, we're K through 2. So our building, with all students under the age of 8, presents some, she mentioned social emotional learning, I'll talk a little bit about that, but just a little bit different clientele, a little bit different focus. So our goals in our building are every student reading, writing, and math at grade level before we transition those students to Robert Frost. That's our #1 focus. The path for education for those students, if we deviate from that in terms of our priorities, it limits opportunities for those kids at a young stage typically. So sometimes those kids are in a challenging position academically by the time they hit the middle school if we don't really focus on reading, writing, and math. For example, increased frustration, being behind their peers. Students sometimes may act out a little bit if they don't have secure social emotional learning skills, and so we work really hard to focus on making sure that when we pass those students on to the next grade, that they are as close to grade level or at or above grade level we can possibly get them. So what that means for us in our building when we send out our surveys and we take input from stakeholders is that our #1 priorities end up being behaviors. And behaviors can mean a number of different things. Behaviors can mean students may have limitations in terms of their social emotional learning, so self-awareness, self-regulation, social skills, making friends, all of those things that maybe sometimes as adults we take for granted, or even with our own kids we may take for granted, especially if they do what you ask them to on the first time, or they listen to you, or they, those types of things. So also for us, behaviors in our building means having to put kids in a position where they have unstructured time leads to them having to rely on their skills. So students with limited skills find their way into impulsive situations, and that adults need to step in and redirect. So that's kind of what behaviors means. Behaviors means as a priority for us, we need to have adults on students. We need to have adults supervising their play. We need to have adults redirecting students in the hallway to make safe choices and not sprint down the hallway or sprint around corners and things like that. Second for us is interventions. As Leslie mentioned, when students are not on grade level, it's important for us to intervene and give them, basically what our goal is that every typical student is going to make a year's worth of growth. Well, students that are behind grade level, it's important for us to add some catch-up growth to that, and that's where our interventions come in. So after that, we have adult support, which I mentioned with behaviors, and so ed assistance being in classrooms is really important. With a population of kindergarten students at 120, Our allocation adds some additional funds to make sure that all kindergarten students have ed assistant time in the classroom. So it's a little bit different allocation for kindergartners in our district than, for example, first graders or second graders or third graders. And then lastly, technology. Previously to being at Mark Twain, when it was Eugene Field, the building worked really, really hard to get to a position of one-to-one iPads. So we have 340 students. Every student has an iPad. We do our district assessment that way. We have a few classrooms that are paperless, and so they use, for example, an app called, not an app, but a program called Notability. So they may have worksheets or skill building drills that they do, and instead of printing off paper, they have their iPad and they can have a stylus and they complete their work on their iPad. Teacher can then take a look at it, save it, make corrections, and it's just a different feel. It's a little bit more technology training as those students are growing up. So those are kind of our 4 priorities at Mark Twain Elementary School. When we get into budget, 98% of my budget is staffing. And so there really isn't, I know Ms. Nealon was asking questions about our supply budget and things like that. Our supply budget it's under $45,000 and it's really not going anywhere. If we end up overspending our supply budget, it's important for us to go to some of our other revenue streams. That could be donors, that could be our partnership with our PTC, that could be other funds, for example, families, we ask families, we charge them a supply budget, and that goes into a different account that is separate from our general fund. So that's kind of our contingency plan when we get into supplies and things like that. So with that being said, this year we started the school year and we had our budget all nice and neat and perfect, and we opened the doors and we ended up with 120 kindergartners that came through the doors, and we only had 5 classrooms. We worked really hard to keep our class sizes down, so kindergarten, it's important for us to keep them at 20 or fewer, and when we opened up our doors, they were well over 20, and you could feel it. You would go into the classrooms and there's just too many 5-year-olds at that point, and it just makes it difficult on them. It's not a great situation for them. So we were fortunate enough that the district stepped in and helped us out and gave us a 6th kindergarten classroom, 6th kindergarten teacher, with some additional EA support. And so this year we have 120, you can see in our profile, we have 120 kindergartners. Our first grade classroom, in talking to my secretary and some of the other folks that monitor attendance and our move-ins and transfers and things like that, we feel the first grade classroom is just a little small, and that they're a little bit, classes should be typically a little bit bigger than that. So we're expecting another 120. Hopefully our numbers stick around that 340. It'll be interesting to see what happens if they go about that. I think our hard number at our building, just with some of our physical limitations with facilities, is probably about 345 is a hard number. We really can't have more than 345 students physically in our building, and that's classroom sizes, that's restrooms and things like that. So we will need to pay very close attention to that moving forward. So with that being said, numbers. We are maintaining our staff that we currently have with the help of the district. So we have 6 classrooms of kindergarten, we have 5 classrooms of first grade, and we have 4 classrooms of second grade. So we're anticipating an enrollment of 340 students. Administration, counseling is all going to remain the same. Just to kind of peek behind the curtain a little bit on our counseling funding, we have a 1.0 counselor. However, we did not have general fund dollars designated for a 1.0 counselor. We had counseling funds that were partial FTE, and then with the behavior allocation of $43,000, we ended up hiring a full-time counselor, because for our building, back to when it was at Eugene Field, that was a priority. Having a counselor for our students is a priority. Now we had some additional funding, and so basically I was able to pay for now an entire counselor out of my general fund, and then I'm taking those resources, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but you'll notice in my ed assistant is bumped up to 53 hours per week, and so I basically am putting my resources in, again, like I mentioned before, adults that are supervising and be teaching expectations for our kids. So that's where those funds went. Dropping down PE, we were one of the very fortunate schools that got the PE grant, the Peak 8 grant. And so, again, you heard the state mandate of PE. So this year, there was some money in contingency, and so I started moving closer to PE every day for all of our students. So I hired a .35 second person, plus I had a 1.0 person that was paid for by the grant. We ended up with 4 days a week of PE, and then the classroom teachers deliver the remaining minutes, basically, of 30 minutes a day, or 30 minutes for the week in the classroom. And that our building just created some issues. When the weather's not great and you can't go outside, we now have PE in the classroom. Even though we had PE delivered by a specialist, our teachers do a fantastic job with some curriculums that are online, other activities that they may do in the classroom to deliver those minutes. And so you'll see next year we are going to have a 1.0 PE teacher, and I'm going to back off on those, on that extra .35 person, and I'm investing that money again into ed assistant time so that we can have additional adults on students. Let's see. So really everything, if you drop down to the classified staff on the school profile, my hours are very similar with the exception of the educational assistants, which is bumping from 30 hours up to 53 hours. The biggest change is and we've done a lot of research on this, we did some school visits, but we are going to start a wellness classroom. Our counselor is going to basically work out of the wellness classroom. It's an entire classroom that will have themed activities. We do have a social and emotional curriculum that we're going to be learning. The classroom teachers will be delivering a majority of those lessons. However, the counselor will be another layer for those students. We will have times where that counselor goes into classrooms and teaches guidance. That counselor is also going to have an ed assistant that is with them full time, which basically enables the counseling position or the wellness room, the counselor to kind of be in two places at once. So if we have some kids that are kind of flaring up a little bit and need some attention, the counselor can go address that situation, or their trained assistant can go address that situation, and we can still run the room, which is giving explicit instruction and social emotional learning and things like that. So that's basically how I address the needs in our building. Because our students are so young and we can't miss on the reading, writing, and math, when the behaviors crop up, they need adult interaction, they need that redirection from adult, and as research shows, it has to happen now. It can't happen, they can't sit in the office for 20 minutes and then I get to them when I get to them. You might ask them why they're there and I don't know, they forgot. We have a tight window that we have to address that, so I have to have resources that can meet the needs of the students in that case.
Could you tell us a little bit about how it's been being in a building that wasn't designed for small children?
Well, Mark Twain Elementary School was a middle school before. We had some growing pains last year a little bit. We identified some areas that were priority, for example, restrooms. I think I had addressed the board before, and the little kids not being able to reach the sink or reach soap and things like that. And so, I think school district was attentive to that, and it took a little bit of time, but we ended up going in and getting some remodeling done this summer, and it actually cleaned up a few behaviors. Little kids standing in line 5 deep with soap in their hand is not a good situation. So we have multiple sinks now, and so kids are in there taking care of their business, and they can get back, and it's been a notable improvement and to the betterment of the children. So
how about the playground and
playground? Moving the toys over, that's been important. We finally got the covered play area. That's been a huge help. I would tell you that the biggest thing that has been the help is the single wall on the weather side of that playground. I mean, you wouldn't think that one wall would impact the playground so much. It's made a gigantic difference. So our rule is we go out no matter what, and the kids just need fresh air. They need to get outside and play, even if it's just for 15 minutes. When it's cold, they expend a little more energy. Yeah. So we send them out, and we've been steadily making some improvements. We are trying to move towards making sure that we buy more toys, for example, and just have things for them to be able to do and productively and in a healthy way play, with supervision and with constant redirection when needed. So, yeah. Other questions?
Your big shift in obviously in addition of the educational assistants, you mentioned especially in kindergarten, you need extra time. Is most of that additional time for this coming budget directed towards the kinders, or is it spread equally through all the grades?
It's more. Basically, our master schedule, we're working on master schedule. So we kind of did 2 surveys that talked about priorities for master schedule and then priorities for budgeting, and the list came out very similar. So when we built our master schedule, the teachers did a great job of providing input in terms of how many assistants we have, what our budget allocates for us, and then what our needs are in terms of time in classrooms. So kindergarten gets more. So kindergarten is guaranteed 2 hours of assistant time, an hour for reading and an hour for math. Basically what they do is they might start off with a whole group instruction, then they go to kind of a rotation or centers circuit kind of, and there's an additional EA that's in there. And then our first and second graders have 45 minutes. And then outside of that, our EAs are used for like lunch supervision, recess supervision, and then depending on kind of where we go after that, sometimes, for example, in PE, we have classrooms that have to double up. So instead of 25 kids going to PE, we have 50 kids go to PE, and we send an assistant with a PE teacher, for example. So that's kind of how we use our assistants, but kindergarten does have a priority because they're the youngest age student.
Thanks.
Similar question
Yeah.
based on the increase for the ed assistants. You said that you need adults reteaching the expectations. Can you talk a little bit about how those adults are trained to do that?
So we're a PBIS school, so we really focus on trying to make sure that when we do redirect a child, for example, I had mentioned the example of running down the hallway. I station myself in the middle of my building, so we have a classroom hallway one direction, we go to the gym another direction, there's an entryway to the school, to the side of the school towards Robinson Street, and then there's the last one that goes towards our main entrance, so kind of a 4-way in there. And, kids get excited and they're pretty fired up heading down the hallways and stuff, and so no matter how many times you talk about being safe in the hallway, making safe choices, using safe walking feet, kids are still going to need redirection. And so that's an example, instead of saying stop running or you need to slow down, speaking from the negative on those, we try to speak from the positive on those. And so it's very important that we have teachers, ed assistants, using common language. So they have PBIS training, for example, they have academic training in the classroom. We try to make sure that the ed assistants have training in terms of asking questions, asking probing questions or leading questions. For example, if they're working on something academically, we don't want to just ask a question where the student can respond and get a yes/no answer or a one-word answer. We want to ask a probing question, a why, or how did you get to that, or what's your reasoning behind, so we try to do some training for our ed assistants in that manner so that they can be an extension of the teacher in the classroom.
And who's in charge of doing that?
Our building we have experts in our district that step in and help. Sometimes we have folks from other buildings, sometimes we use the teachers in some of those cases. A lot of different ways, but a lot of times it's local. It's our local experts.
Like your counselor delivers PBIS training?
She's a piece of that. We actually have a PBIS coach that's in the district that kind of has that role. But our counselor can deliver some of those as well. Yes.
Well, I'm certainly sympathetic with the need for children and needing direction and boundaries. Really, it's parenting skills, a lot of it. What pool do you draw from to get these classified employees in to help?
I think in terms of a hiring process, we follow a very similar hiring process in the district. I mean, we open a position, we advertise for it, we try to network as much as possible with possibly other school districts or our HR department and try to find the best candidates we can. Sometimes the applicant pools are a little thin, sometimes you're fortunate. This year, I have to say, I was very fortunate. We had some additional needs. We got some help from the district office in terms of opening some positions, but I hired 1, 2, 3 additional ed assistants. Actually, technically 4, sorry, we had one that left earlier. I've been very fortunate. One of the things I take a look at when I hire employees is the first 2 boxes that I like to check are hiring great people and hiring great employees. And then secondarily, their skill set. Because I think if you have great people, that's where you want to start first. And so this year, I've been very fortunate. I've had some great employees that have filled those positions, but yeah, we can have thin applicant pools at times.
I'm curious to know, you talked about PE and its effect on the children. When do you give PE to your children?
It's all throughout the day. This year, to be perfectly honest, we have 4 PEs. The kids get 4 PEs a week. And it's during our special, so we have 4 PEs a week, and then we have 1 library for our week. And we have 2 PE teachers going, so we're running the gym the entire time. We sometimes have PEs happening at the same time, so a PE class might be outside. A PE class may, if it's bad weather, will end up being in a classroom, and while the gym is going on. One thing that's been tough on our kids, I think, has been having to run PE during lunchtime. So our building at Mark Twain has a gym, and then we have a stage. The stage acts as our cafeteria because it's right next to the kitchen. And so we have a couple of PEs where we have a couple of PEs during lunchtime. It's a lot of noise. It's a lot of noise, and it can be really hard on the kids. So one of the things that we're taking a look at is trying our best not to have PE during lunchtime, having that be a time where we don't fill the gym, and then also offering some alternative spaces for kids in terms of lunch. There are some kids that have a difficult time going and eating with 119 classmates. And so having an alternative space for kids to go where it's maybe just a little quieter, or maybe there's just a few people in there, or maybe there's some adult supervision in there that can help redirect kids in terms of their behavior and being respectful of classmates and things like that.
On the budget itself, you do not have a reserve. You indicated that you rely on, your fallback position is to go to parents and or other revenue streams that you have available to you. How common is that?
Actually, I swung the other way. The reason I don't have a contingency, and you can see in my line, the previous year, I had a $14,000 contingency, and then the year before that, there was a $44,000 contingency. I was trying to plan for PE, and moving towards the fact that PE was going to mandate 150 minutes, 5 days a week, for every student in your building from a licensed specialist. Well, since then, there's been some changes. Our classroom teachers are qualified to teach PE using specific curriculum. It's to the point in my building where it's unreasonable to have a specialist deliver that instruction, and so some of my classroom teachers are going to have to deliver some of that. So, getting back to your original question, I went to another PE teacher. I was trying to get to meet that state standard, and I'm seeing that doing that with a specialist is not a reality. We would like to live in the ideal, I think, but when we have certain restrictions, we're just physically not able to. And so reality has kind of hit, and I need to have a 1.0 teacher. I'm starting to see that our behaviors are of the utmost importance, which means I need to have additional adult supervision. And so that money, the reason I don't have a contingency is I'm spending every dime on adults, on kids.
On the ed assistants.
Yep.
And just to clarify, it's physically impossible to have a specialist deliver PE because of your facility, that there's just not space?
They have to go somewhere else. So they have to go outside, or they have to go in the classroom, yeah, with a specialist. Now, it can be done. I mean, it's not impossible. We can do it, for sure. It takes the right person, and it takes some concessions a little bit too. I think classroom teachers do an outstanding job when they have some curriculums that are delivered through the TV. They can do yoga, they can do Go Noodle is another curriculum that we use, adventure fitness. There are a number of things that we can do, and the classroom teachers have a great relationship with the kids, and they do an outstanding job of delivering those minutes. So if you have something that's working and is good for the kids, there's no reason to go away from that.
So maybe this is a question for Steve. This budget does not have an item for future years, nor did the previous budget.
I think some of the
However, first budget we reviewed did, and you indicated that that was required by the state.
It's not, it's, if you put money in there, you can't spend it in that budget year, but it's, you don't have to put money in.
Why do some schools have it and others not?
It's principals' plans and what they're choosing to do with their resources, and it's gonna be a little different for each school.
What would be the incentive for a principal to put that item in their budget if they're already impacted in trying to stretch every dollar?
I'll address that. Charles, it could be smaller class sizes. As an example, Greg could make a choice to increase the average class sizes at Mark Twain, and he could put $50,000 or $60,000 in a reserve for future staffing. But he's clearly made an identified priority to keep kindergarten class sizes under 20 and to keep his 1-2 classes under 25. You know, he could bump the kindergarten classes to 22, 23, his 1-2 classes to 26. He could put money into reserve if he chose to do that. And keep in mind, a K-2 school of such a size as Mark Twain is different than a Scotts Mills school where you have blended classrooms and many times other dynamics that are at play that Greg wouldn't experience here. Kirsten may experience more peaks and valleys in her enrollment simply because it's a smaller school as compared to what Greg can generally anticipate some stability in enrollment from year to year. So it's not to say that a principal at a rural school may have zero or very little in reserve, but that could be a motivating factor to help them. Again, the reality is that principals have that opportunity to make some adjustments at the site-based level, including reserves for future years for staffing purposes.
Well, I want to have a separate, I don't want to burden this body with my questions, but I'll get together with Steve,
Sure.
or perhaps you, and
Absolutely.
talk about that item in the budgets more fully. Thank you.
Did you have a question, Meg?
Yeah, one thing, in the past, sometimes we've shown like the number of ESS students, and I mean, that really can affect a program, building.
We're pretty consistent, about 44 students this year. We have a very strong ELL program. One certified teacher, and we have one ed assistant that's in there, an ELL ed assistant. Our ELL ed assistant is bilingual. Main responsibility, in addition to helping students during the day, is being kind of a liaison with those families so that they have a point person that at any time they can contact them, text them. They have someone at the school that can listen to their and answer their concerns immediately. So we actually have a separate phone for that. That employee has a separate phone that is with them all the time and sets those families at ease, lets them know that we value them and we know that they're very important and we want to make sure that their children have the best opportunities available.
Do you have multiple languages or?
Spanish primarily, yeah, Spanish primarily. I think we have one that is outside of Spanish as an English language learner, so, but pretty consistently Spanish. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you noted before that correct me if I'm wrong, most of your classes are paperless?
No, it's mainly teacher by teacher. It depends on the capability of the students. So we might have a teacher that emphasizes using the program is called Notability, but it's basically paperless. We have a couple of teachers that are very tech savvy and in being very tech savvy, do an outstanding job of teaching their kids and training their kids to utilize technology. Other teachers don't spend their time and focus on that. They spend their time and focus in different ways, and so they may use paper. So we're not paperless school-wide by any means. No.
Okay, and you said you have a one-on-one iPad for every student in your school?
Yes.
Even with the significant increase this year at the beginning of the year?
Yes.
How'd you get those?
A lot of work over a long period of time.
I'd like to know where the money came from.
Over a long period of time. I think it started off the principal prior to me. It started off with budgeting and taking advantage of some great prices and things like that. As Leslie alluded to, we are currently experiencing some of our older iPads not updating some current programs, and so I still, if you'll notice in my general fund, I've had to trim just a little bit. I'm trying to look at, it's computer hardware, so it's under, elementary regular programs, the fourth line there, it's a 480 object code. $10,000 this year. Previously it was $15,000, and so we take a $10,000 general fund. We, the school district gives us a stipend per student, $15 a student, so that equates out to about $5,000 roughly. And so we spend $15,000 every year from those funds on iPad replacement program. And then this year, we also had an anonymous donor, and we took some of those funds and we purchased a couple of new classroom iPads. And I have had a couple of conversations with a few folks in our PTC, the next PTC meeting that I'm going to go to. One of the questions that the PTC members continue to talk to me about is a focus, something that we can, something that we can wrap our hands around and really focus on and let folks know that this is a priority for us and this is one item that we would like to raise funds for. And I think as we finished our surveys and talked to staff about what's important, I know that there's a little bit of a hole. The math doesn't add up to cycle all of our iPads out on the, on the schedule that's needed to get to where we need to, where we need to get.
Okay. And then you have, on your first page here, you have intervention is blank. So are you putting all your... I'm sorry, in the student license ratio. Excuse me.
Okay. So interventions means a certified or a licensed staff member that teaches interventions.
Yes.
We are fortunate enough that we are a school that gets Title funds, Title 1A funds. And so we have faced some reduction in Title, but I have next year I will be going into that school year with a 0.5 Title person, and they are going to be responsible for planning and delivering interventions, specifically reading as a priority. And then also I have 3 hours, which is our intervention time, 3 hours of an ed assistant that's involved in that. So my budget in Title that I'm anticipating is about $75,000, and that would be the intervention. So there's nothing there because I'm not spending any general fund dollars on that.
Okay. Okay. What are your top 3 programs that you really, really want to have?
I would tell you for my building, the need that I'm seeing reoccurring on it as a regular theme is the social emotional learning. More students are coming to school with limited skills in self-awareness, self-regulation, problem-solving skills, just the ability to interact with their peers, the ability to sit and listen to another adult and take in the amount of education that I feel like we're required to deliver them. It's a lot for a kiddo, and I think they reach their breaking point. They need breaks, they need scheduled breaks, they need a lot of sensory activities, and they just need to learn how to cope. So our responsibility has shifted a little bit, and that's one of the reasons that we're taking a look at some social emotional curriculums. We have some standards that are now being required of us to deliver to students, but our responsibility has shifted just a tiny bit into now we're starting to have to teach some of those skills, and it's tough. It's tough to see kids that are smart enough to get the academics, the reading, writing, and the math, but because they can't sit next to little Susie, or because they just get in some conflicts and just work themselves up into a frenzy, they need an adult to help work them through that. They need some constant redirection, some explicit instruction in when you feel yourself get a little frustrated, here's a couple of strategies to help bring yourself down to a place where you can now begin to learn.
So how long have you been at Mark Twain?
This is my 2nd year, so next year will be number 3.
Okay. So when you got there last year, and you're becoming familiar with the students without the hike of this year, are you finding that the students that were there before, it was pretty stable, or because you had a huge group of kids come in this year?
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering, is that throughout the K-1 too? Or is that mostly kinder? Is that,
What's your definition of stable? What are you referring to when you say stable?
where you don't have to have education assistants go from 30 to 53? That's what I mean by stable.
So I would tell you that my very first year, we had a TOSA that was in place, a dean of students. So basically this person was actually, had a very good counseling kind of background. This person delivered some problem-solving lessons in the classrooms, went around and delivered. So they basically, again, went back to, they were delivering some social-emotional learning to the students. And so I had that as a halftime person. Every single day they came for halftime and they dealt with a lot of some of those, problem-solving situations with kids. I had to reduce that, and I went into that saying that I knew that I was going to have to do more. I was going to have to be more visible and do more because I needed to use that money. I think now I used it to get us to PE. I think now I know that I just need more adults. I need more hands-on. So that's, I wouldn't say it's any different. I think we still have those kids that come in that still have some limitations. It's a little hotter right now because there's 120 of them.
Right.
In 6 classrooms, yeah.
Okay.
And anytime you start a classroom after 3.5 weeks in the school year,
Yeah.
and you pluck kids out of rooms and you put them in a new room, it's not ideal.
There's an
It's
adjustment
less than
period.
ideal.
Do we know how that happened?
In terms of,
Did everyone just move here, the new apartments, like what happened?
they just kept coming.
Okay, and we think they're gonna keep coming next year.
Craig, let me answer that. I mean, and that's a fair question, but this is not the first time we've experienced 120 kids in kindergarten. We used to have 150 plus kids when they were at Mark Twain, Melissa. So we just finished the enrollment work group for the entire school district. We actually anticipate over the next couple of years a decline in kindergarten simply because there are fewer babies born over the last few years. So Greg does have 120. It's large for that school, but that school is at 340 students. That school's held 370 or 80 students in the past, admittedly middle school students. So there's clearly some ability to be able to handle those. I think the uniqueness that Greg is referring to, though, and Greg, you can correct me if I'm mistaken, is that, and we're hearing from this across the state, there are some unique behaviors and new behaviors we're seeing at the early childhood, early elementary level that we haven't as an education system across Oregon, across the country, experienced in the past. We're seeing symptoms of that, and we especially see the most significant symptoms at the K-2 level. So I agree that it's large size, but also there's just some unique behaviors that are beginning to happen with our students today. And I will acknowledge, I think full-day kindergarten, while it's a huge thing, and I think it supports our kids academically, I think some kids aren't prepared for that.
I agree. I just thinking about, you said earlier, 345 was like capacity, and you've got another 120 coming next year, and then the year after that, after 120, you're open.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, a couple things. Capacity meaning kindergarten had 20 kids, first and second grade had 25 kids. That's where I get that 140,
Yeah, but it's
140,
tight there.
yeah, 345 number. It is. I would tell you that one of the things that we are doing right now is really trying to control the transfer numbers. There are a number of students who do not live in the Mark Twain Elementary boundary that are trying to come in. And unfortunately, I'm in a position where I have to decline all of those transfers until there's a date that after the school year starts where I can take a look at how many seats I actually have available, and then I can begin to accept some students and bring some kids in. I'm still not going to go right up to that cap number because, for example, last week we got 4 new students and they just showed up. So, I mean, it happens and we just deal with it. I mean, we know it's coming. It's not a shock. It's not a surprise. I think if you go into it with that mentality that nothing should surprise you, you're going to be fine. So I try to do that.
Greg, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you
Really
very
appreciate
much.
it. All right, Jamie McCarty for Victor Point Evergreen.
It's getting warm in here. Wish I had some dynamic presentation to get you, going, and it's getting late. So I'll try to talk about both Victor Point and Evergreen kind of together, and if you want me to separate anything out, I can do so as well. really above the line in just costs of employees. Everything is pretty status quo other than our counseling allotment. Again, just want to thank the board for I know it's been talked about a little bit tonight, but counseling is not something I've been deeply trained in, and there are so many things on a daily basis that come to me where I feel like, man, I need some help. I need some, and so I'm really excited for that for both schools and our kids that get that opportunity. So that's the little change that you see in both line items above the line. Also, for this year, I did budget 10 FTE at Victor Point for that PE teacher, and we got that grant late, so that's the difference. There is actually $97,500 for a full-time teacher. So that really helped our contingency at the end this year with that. Really below the line in, copies, supplies, everything is almost identical as last year. Our goal and to support our district mission and our board is 100% graduation rate for our seniors. And we got to give our kids everything, and I presented to the board at the last board meeting. Our main goals are to give our teachers everything they need, to give our students everything they need. And so in the last couple of years, we've put together a 3-year technology plan, and we have been able to get everything that our teachers need with iPads. We're 1-to-1 at both schools with iPads K2, 1-to-1 3-8 with Chromebooks. So we've put a lot of money, over $100,000 into technology in the last 3 years. This is the last year of our 3-year plan, and we're in the process of looking forward to our next 3-year plan. I think you got to be strategic and competitive in your approach when budgeting and trying to get those things for your school and to see the future. Unfortunately, technology, we don't know what's coming out tomorrow. So we put in a 30 computer lab 3 years ago. Well, those computers are obsolete. We shouldn't have went computer lab. We should have went Chromebooks, and we should have went a little smaller, a little easier transport. You just don't know how that's going to go. So we work with our PTC, our district funds, and our building budgets to create our technology of what we get for our students there. But pretty much when you have encumbered amounts of about 95% of your budget, it all goes to supplies, copies, things that are already encumbered, salaries. So there's not a lot here that's going to kind of blow you away.
Talk about your reserve.
Sure.
For Victor Point, it's
Sure.
sizable, your plans for that?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's two folds to that. When you put in as much of technology as we've had, almost $100,000, it takes so much to keep it up every year and to plan. The other thing is that is only 3 years of a PE teacher. So when you're trying to roll that over and roll that over and roll that over, and those minutes are mandated to me, almost $100,000 a year is going to that. That's only 3 years, and got to be stewards of our money and make sure that every penny is accounted for. And if we don't need it, we're going to put that away and use it when another state mandate comes, or when we're told this is what's happening. We have that, and we're ready to attack.
So in your mind, you're kind of earmarking this for the technology upgrades, which we know things just die, right?
Most definitely.
Number one. Number two is the PE.
Most definitely.
Okay. So
Yeah.
those are, if I'm right. Those
I think
are
we
the
have
two.
one more year of the PE grant, and it's done.
Okay.
And our school, our teachers, our kids, and with that federal mandate, we have to.
Well, we're gonna have to do something different, because
Yeah.
that's not a stable funding source for people, your reserve,
Right.
that's gonna run out at some point.
Exactly.
Fingers crossed that the legislature will do something up for us. Jennifer? That'd be nice.
I have a question
Piggybacking it.
that might be better for Steve. I'm looking at the Victor Point reserve for next year. It's $300,000. Is that $300,000 total, or is that $300,000 plus the $155 from the previous year plus the $180 from the previous year?
That would be, so as part of his allocation of the $1,673,000 total for this year, it included a reconciled amount from 16-17 of plus 86,792, which the reason he had quite a bit more than what was estimated at budget time last year is because the PE grant lived. And then he budgeted, what, 155 for this year. As of right now, we're anticipating 130. It could very well come in. We usually try to go conservative. That could come higher than that. So both those numbers have been included in that figure. So when you look at the 300,000 there, it encompasses those two amounts.
Okay, so it's like the total savings account, it's not
Total.
just what we're putting in this
Right,
year.
exactly,
Okay.
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And assuming your focus is the same in Evergreen as technology?
It is. Evergreen will be coming up with some big technology upgrades, probably next year. And that's the lease, they were talking about lease earlier, their lease runs out on the Chromebooks. Mr. Murphy's classroom still has these, they're one-to-one, but they're very old laptops. And there's quite a bit of technology that staff and school will be focused towards.
Could you tell us a little bit about how the two schools do music and art and drama, things like that?
Kind of like the other principals have explained, our teachers are phenomenal. This year at Victor Point, they did a 3-week unit on symphony and different music all the way through, and then we took our school to the Oregon Symphony. All of December, if you walk our halls, music's happening every single day, getting ready for a holiday program. Right now we got a third of our school in a drama program, so for 3 months it's all theatrical, musical. We were able to, in the past, our after-school band was growing. The high school band teacher would come out and we were going to combine with Evergreen and get that going, but that, band teacher left, and so we're hoping that moves back. We have art as an elective in the middle school. Art is happening daily, K-5, in both schools.
These conversations are confusing me a little bit. Are we looking at the total monies available to each school?
Yep.
They're
For
talking
this year.
about title grants and other monies, and
No.
they use those monies for?
No, total money available
In this budget?
within the general fund.
They're
Tonight.
in this budget.
No, just general fund here. Tonight. Just general fund. This is your general fund allotment.
I see.
We are not a title school. Neither school is a title school.
So some of the schools have a budget that's separate from what we're looking at then?
Mark Twain
Additional
and Robert
fund.
Frost's, right?
We have 6 schools that are Title I funded schools. Charles, those are federal dollars to augment specifically reading and math instruction. Federal dollars, those are regulated by the federal government. But Steve could comment better on this, but we have multiple revenue sources. As an example, on May 10th, you'll hear from Dana Peterson speaking about special education, which is a compilation of federal dollars, state revenue dollars, Medicaid revenue dollars, state high-cost disability dollars. I mean, when you see the budget, you'll see that there are multiple revenue sources. We're here with each one of the principals, generally speaking, we're talking solely general fund dollars, those dollars that come through the state school fund as provided by income tax revenue and local revenue and property taxes.
So do we take into consideration when we're looking at the budget and these entitlements? Some of the principals say, well, we need to do this and we need to do that, and we spend all our money on this or not.
Yeah, as much as we
How does the
can.
budget committee evaluate whether the school needs funds or not if we're not including the entitlement funds in our consideration?
Well, the entitlement funds are included based upon the special programs that we have designated in the district. It's really up to the administrator to decide how to use their general fund dollars. The special revenue dollars are determined by the directors and, frankly, generally speaking, mandates that come with those dollars. We have very little flexibility on use of those dollars. As an example, we can't use Title I dollars for writing support or for PE. They have to be used exclusively for add-on support, not general fund instruction, but add-on support for reading and math. We're required to meet that parameter. So, and we won't even know Title I dollar revenues with certainty for a number of months yet.
But in the packet you received for the next meeting, that will include all of the special revenue funds and those types of things. Not to quite this detail
we'll
level.
see those
to
at
the
that time?
fund and function level, correct?
Will we see those ahead of that time?
Yes.
So you carried over in 2016-17, almost $87,000.
Where are you looking?
I'm sorry.
Victor Point?
Okay, yeah, Victor Point. Because you're talking about Victor Point, right? I was
Both.
talking about Evergreen.
Both schools,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So is this Evergreen too?
No, they're separate tabs.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they would, okay. Okay. I thought you were just about Evergreen,
My carryover at Victor
Oh,
Point,
okay.
16-17 was 180,
Okay, yeah.
and then 155, and because of the PE grant, it
Right.
looks pretty
Okay,
inflated.
now it's
but-
making
yeah.
sense. I'm like, these numbers are not matching up at all. So, your school, Evergreen and Victor Point, you have no music, no remediation, and your numbers are really good, your students, how many students you have there. And do you have you have one-on-one iPads and Chromebooks at both schools?
Yes.
And did the PTC raise that money, or were you able to just?
We have
get out
worked
your
with our
general fund?
district, PTC, and general fund to all work together to raise that money.
Okay.
Our PTC at both schools is.
And do you get a stipend from the district?
Yeah, it's been anywhere from $25 to
Every school does.
$15
Oh, every school does.
per student per year.
I'm sorry,
So-
25.
$15 per student for,
15. Okay. And is that at every school?
Every
15? Okay, thank you.
It's shown on the revenue page.
Okay.
Shelley, most of the schools have been working for years to get to one-to-one.
Oh, I know, I'm just.
They've been working for years to get there, so
Right,
it's not like the last 2 years.
This year, there was also a
Okay.
anonymous donation to the district of $156,000. So every school, including the 2 charter schools, received $12,000. So that was an additional pot of money that some of the schools helped to continue their technology goals. They were able to maybe do a little bit more this year in addition to the sources that Jamie mentioned.
Right.
The addition of that and the outdoor school grant,
Right.
I'll tell you, we really felt that, like a little weight off our shoulders, and our teachers really felt like they had
Some
more.
money.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it was really neat.
So that $12,000, they were able to do what they.
Whatever they
with it.
want.
Oh, okay, very.
And
there
some
wasn't- it
schools
wasn't
have
earmarked for-
utilized most or all of it, and others are still spending.
And that won't be next year.
No, that was one time for this year.
Thank you for your presentation, thank you.
Any other questions? Good? All right, thank you, Jamie, appreciate it. Therese Gerlitz, Butte Creek.
Thank you for having me. Butte Creek. Brief recap of our enrollment. This year, we had, similar to some of the other schools, we had an unexpected jump in our first grade class. We had 6 families move in this year, which bumped that up pretty significantly. So I want to thank the district for their extra support this year while we balanced that. In general, at Butte Creek, you can have 3 split classes, and so that this year, that's our 3, 5, and 8. So we'll be graduating one of those large double 8th grade classes, and then that large kindergarten year this year will move in then and replace that graduating double class. So that's our student enrollment piece. Another part that can be misleading in there, when you look at our first grade numbers, it looks like there's 36 students. We house the district's K-1-2 SLP program for special education students. And so we have kindergarten, first and second grade students that with those IEPs that are housed in a separate program, but on this enrollment page, it still shows up, or it could appear that they're all in that same classroom, and that's not accurate. So I wanted to point that out. Okay. Also, we wanted to thank the district for that support of the counseling. Butte Creek is one of the fortunate schools that had, Mr. Palmer before me had worked really hard to have that be part of the general fund. And that counselor has been at 0.8, and so we're looking forward to trying to increase those services to students in the upcoming year. Objectives for our building are going to be very similar to what you've already heard. Those focuses on technology, student support. We are a Title I school, so working on some of those compliance issues for that, or requirements, and working on supporting those district goals of graduation and attendance. Another change that you will see this year is going to be some extra duty hours as a kind of a tag coordinator stipend in our building. Increase our sub-budget just a little bit there. We're very thankful this year that the district had budgeted some funds for teachers to be able to use to attend some conferences, but then that also sometimes unfortunately takes them out of the building during the day. And then the only other possible staffing changes that we would anticipate, we would need to wait for those title funding amounts, which aren't available as of yet. So for example, last year when they finished the school year, thinking that there's going to be 1.0 Title I teacher in our building, and this year it's at a 0.7. And that decision, happens in August when those final funding numbers come through. So we plan or hope for the best and plan for the worst on that one. So you'll notice that I know that people have been talking about that remediation piece, so again, that's why that's blank, because it's the federal program funded there, so not part of my general budget. In terms of our surplus, like everybody else, planning for that PERS adjustment, we are one of the other schools that is recipient of a PE grant. We have 2 full-time PE, or 2.0 FTE in our building. One of those that is the middle school PE teacher, PE and health, has been part of the general fund for a long time, but that second 1.0 FTE for PE does come directly from that grant and serves the kindergarten through 4, and then one of our 5th grade classes. So again, like everybody else, we got to keep a chunk of money in there. Other things that we are looking at, the PACE report for our playground. That was, we currently have skeleton swing sets, no swings, and the kids are very sad. And so, and we were going to lose our large wooden play structure, because really you shouldn't have wooden play structures outside in Oregon. And so that's going away, and play structures can cost as much as a small house. So that's going to be a partnership between us, and we have a really fantastic PTT. So we're thankful that they're making that one of their priorities too, is how can we try to fill that playground back out.
I have a question. Accelerated reader program. I saw that on a couple of, not on everybody's, but I saw it a couple of places. I was just curious, what is that?
Yeah, so STAR is our district assessment, and Accelerated Reader is one of those related products. And so one of the uses of that is reading that students can do that's at their actual reading level. And after they read, they can answer some comprehension questions and kind of get some points. And so teachers use that as an incentive to encourage students to read at home. And then there's some classroom incentives for finishing and passing those tests. And then that can feed into some of the other reports that they can do for reading.
So the STAR assessment data can start a student at the right level in their reading on that program.
And then many of our teachers, if you look in their classrooms, their classroom libraries are then arranged by those same like reading lexile. So when they're looking at that program and they know that I'm supposed to be reading at this level, I can go to this section and I can pick a book that's appropriate for me.
Thank you.
Can you explain also the reader board project?
Sure.
The last one,
Sure.
4150.
Yep, and I'm going to draw on Kevin just a little bit here. I think the reader board went down, what, 5 years ago?
Blew away the wind.
Blew away the wind. Okay.
Not just over.
Yeah, so it's a dream out there on Highway 213 for us to get some representation again. And but those are a bit spending. So our step right now is looking at that directional boring, and a little bit of that was put on the site burner as we were one of the seismic rehabilitation schools this year, and you don't want to try to put in a new sign when they're building a new school.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So Trace, can you address your population? I know it's pretty diverse.
For sure, for sure. When we're talking about languages served, we have a Spanish-speaking staff. We also have a staff member who speaks Russian, and we're very fortunate that she also teaches a Russian language elective to our middle school students during the day, and then also an after-school program for our K through 5 students. So that really serves to enrich that, and that is not just students who speak Russian. We have students of all different backgrounds in there. We even have students that come from other schools that participate in that after-school program. We're a K through 8 and we're a Title I school, and we've got the behavior classroom K1 too, so we've got a pretty good mix of interesting things. We're your only Clackamas County school, so that gives us some wins and losses.
Yeah.
Teresa, do you have music?
We do not.
Do your teachers provide?
Yes, yeah, the same as everybody else. They incorporate it as much as they can during the day, and it's definitely best practice. They've got their sight word songs and their counting by 2 songs, and so same as everybody else, you'll hear music in the hallways every day, but as far as formal instruction, that's not something.
I forgot to ask Jamie, but what are your top 3 wishes or that you really want?
Oh, you ask my teachers, it's gonna be a staff bathroom. There's one, but when everybody goes to recess and there's 13 adults that are trying to use that, there goes your 15-minute recess. So
Staff bathroom.
So staff bathroom, that would be a
Yeah, number 2.
Similar to everybody else. I mean, if there was some way that we could have every student come to school that had a good night's sleep and a good breakfast and had showered at least 3 times that week and was safe. Man, if you guys could provide that some way or tell us how to provide that some way so they could just come ready, then that would be our dream.
Okay.
So that would be being able to work with the families, outreach to families.
Yep. For example, we had a family just move away and then they are moving to their 3rd school, and that's just this year. That we call them our 2 a.m. family, because they're the one that you think about at 2 a.m. And so when you're talking about all of these interventions, if there was a way that we could address some of that stuff and just move it out of the way so that we could do reading and writing and math and science and everything. But we know it's not a perfect world.
Nothing is a perfect world, but it doesn't hurt to ask what you want.
Right.
And there's a lot of finagling.
Yep.
So
That's what we want.
it's good to know what the
Healthy,
wish
safe
list is.
kids ready to learn.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. All right, Brett Davison, Silverton Middle School.
So I guess I'll hop right into just changes that are there and go through questions and all that. I'm at middle school, and so we're 6, 7, 8 at Schlater Street, the old high school, at least parts of it. And probably the most interesting part about being new this year is just trying to figure out logistics of the building and finding space, even though it feels bigger than it actually is. But I think the staff is doing a really good job of making the best of that situation. And honestly, when I walk through some of the halls that I went through when I was in high school, it looks nicer than when I was there. So we're doing okay. So big changes in terms of, or any of the big changes. There's no giant changes, but I just want to point out some of the things that we're thinking about for next year. In terms of staffing, you'll see at the very top, there's an increase of 0.5 overall in teaching staff. Still working on specifics for that. One of the big goals and one of the big things that the staff consistently says that they want, and I feel is a high priority, is a broken record, but the social emotional at-risk kids that the way we normally do business just doesn't work no matter what we do. And so being at Silverton High School previously and then at West Albany, if you guys know Helen Thomas, trying to build something within the school to address that a little bit. And so that's a goal. I don't know how big of a deal I can make that currently, but I want to at least do it on a miniature scale to have a place where kids can go to just work on the biggest barriers that they have to their success or the skills that they need to work on, whether that's self-regulation, organization, just having a quiet spot to cool down. So I built that in there to take into account kind of a shuffling around of staff and people that would be good at that. And then how I'm going to reallocate that, I'm not quite sure yet. It could be a little bit in science, even though Kirsten tried to steal my science teacher. Could be in math, could be in English. It just kind of depends on, as I'm talking with staff and decisions about who should do what next year. That'll kind of determine that. But I wanted to build that in there because that's a real priority for me and the staff. We're just having a tough time dealing with some kids, and we want to do what's best for them because we want to get them ready for high school.
And it's 0.5 FTE.
So 0.5 increase in licensed staff. Down below there's some increases in hours of, there's an increase in hours of ed assistant, just a little bit, increase in hours of in clerical assistant, that's the front desk person. A little bit here and there, just to kind of like what people talked about before, when you get to the middle school, there's just so many more athletics that are happening and activities and just coming and going, and then when you get to high school, it's even more. And just to address those kind of situations. We also have multiple special programs at the school that also increase just stuff that needs to be done in the front office especially. Below the line, I actually looking at Leslie Roach's budget, I like how simple it gets, and my office manager and I talk a lot about trying to simplify all of the line items that have been put in here in the past. But we're working on that. Some of the bigger changes you see, 6th grade supplies was put in there, $2,500, and that was mainly to account for the changeover to the new building, to address them coming over there and just kind of unknown needs in the move for the teachers that were going to be there in those classrooms. As I'm trying, one of my goals personally was to work on the school kind of coming together, the staff integrating, and even just knowing each other better and working as departments, and not just grade levels. I basically took that money and just distributed it through the different subject matters. And so, talking to the staff, one of my goals for them, you'll just see each one of the subject matters has an increase in their dollar amount. I'm going to ask them this spring to start developing a plan for next year, how they're going to do that so that they can just plan really strategically about how they want to spend that money. And then we'll just have a conversation of how that would look. But they're on the ground and they know what they need, and I want them to, as a group, come up with how they want to spend those dollars. Especially when you get down to science and the curriculum that we've been working with. Some of the cooler stuff that you can use in the STEM Scopes curriculum requires the purchase of supplies. So them going into that and being able to buy some stuff ahead of time so they have it all mapped out. So you'll just see those increases kind of along the way. The technology, if you get down to middle, junior high, 6A programs, technology education, one of the things that I'm really excited about next year is trying to take our video tech and computer tech program, just continue to improve that and streamline that with the high school. I've been talking with Drew and talking with some of his staff in terms of even equipment to buy so that I can get middle school kids doing, especially the video tech stuff that you see the high schoolers going around doing all the time, and getting some versions of that maybe aren't quite as expensive as the high school, so they can work on those things and just get that program streamlined, because I think there's a lot of cool opportunities for middle school kids to get connected there. So that's why there's an increase in there especially. Everything else down there stays the same until you get to operation maintenance of plant services. Another thing that is consistently we talk about as a staff is making that building ours and creating an identity and a culture that is ours, and it is a huge priority for me and a huge priority for the staff, for us all and the kids, most importantly, to walk into that building and say, this is not an old high school, this is Silverton Middle School, we're proud of this school, and feel good about coming in. And that to me is worth spending money on that, and so you'll see I put some money in there, $2,000 for building and grounds improvements, and that kind of sounds like a general catch-all, but it really is about Jennifer was in there and saw the beginning of the mural that we're doing in the cafeteria, and just working on those kind of things, painting, murals, plants, whatever we can do just to make it feel good. And I know that kind of sounds squishy to some people, but I think it's important when you're a kid walking around the building to go, yeah, this is a good place to go to school. And I think those things matter. So I added money in there for that, because that's a priority for our building. And then kind of like everybody else, I did put in some stuff for contingency and reserve. To me, in the back of my mind, I am trying to add technology. We're in a pretty good spot right now, but we're farther away from one-to-one than other people are. So I want to just continue to add to that, but then also plan for when those things start coming out. And so we're focused mainly on Chromebook carts. We do have some iMacs and things like that for the video production and computer tech class. And so those things I'm working with Drew on a district level because he's got some connections that I don't have where we can get those for that are not very expensive. So that's kind of the rundown of the biggest changes.
I have some questions
Yeah.
related to student behavior.
Yeah.
So, high school, I mean, they really monitor dropout rates.
Yeah.
Are they doing that in middle school so much, or
Yeah, well, you mean just in terms of
like kids just
who's coming
quitting
and going?
school?
Yeah, and that part of the reason why one of my major focuses I want to build that into the school day with some kids is because as some kids have just stopped,
Right.
I know that if I had them with the right person, I could keep them there. And now at the beginning, honestly, it wouldn't be incredibly academic because sometimes just getting them in the door is priority number one and get them in a good state, and then we start working on academics. That's why that's there, because we watch that closely. We try to get them to come back and work with the families and do everything we can. And sometimes it's just, it's probably overused, but it is just completely true. You have to have a kid be connected to at least one adult, and you have to have them connected to something. And so whatever we can offer at the middle school that's a program that piques their interest, or can have at least one adult that they trust and connect to, they're in, we've got them. And then we can work on the other stuff after that. And so having a variety of things at the middle school, at video tech and computer tech, band, choir, art all day, are luxuries that I can have that the rural schools, it's much harder for them to budget for. But that is one blessing that we have, is we have a lot of different things that we work really hard to try to get them connected to at least one thing. That relationship piece is the other thing that's a little bit harder, and so we want to be focused on that.
Can you explain kind of what your campus monitor does? And I think he probably does some of that.
The campus monitor thing is a catch-all for everything. I mean, everything from just walking the perimeter of the building, locking gates, greeting kids in the morning, shuttling kids back and forth that miss the bus to the high school. And then just supervision all the time, making good connections with kids. A little bit involved in just discipline matters, and just kind of all across the board. And a lot of good connections with a lot of kids. So.
I just want to piggyback to anybody's question about a number and set a statistic about those kids who are having to work really hard to get to come to school that we might consider drop out of high school. Like being able to compare budget-wise between high school and middle school. If we had a common number, we could look at that. So I don't know if there is something like that, but that's just something to think about in the future.
Well, we're coming up on that because we're putting basically together, because another part of the transition of the goal I want is, my number one goal is we hand off kids to the high school that are already connected to something, connected to a person, and then are at level. And so I want to have we're going to have a few meetings. We've already had a few with some kids, but they're going to know what every kid needs, and especially the ones that are at risk. And so I'll have a better idea about that specific number when we get to that point, but we're right in the middle of making that list, and had already had some meetings with Mrs. Drescher over at the high school, and so we're in that process. But, yeah, it's the actual number of kids that are extremely at risk of dropping out, I feel like is not very high, but they're very time consuming. They have to be. I mean, you gotta pour into them, and so.
If we're providing services
Yeah.
for those at the high school,
Yeah.
and you don't have that same support in
Right.
the middle school, I mean, it's important to know so that we can compare
Right.
levels of service and make adjustments if needed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I'm gonna piggyback on that. In your line item, on the very first page at the top, you have licensed staff counselor and media, 93,300 for 16-17, and then 97,500 for 17-18. And then the same you're requesting for this fall, right?
So where are you looking at?
I'm sorry. The very first page at the top, it says FTE licensed staff counselor and media.
So 146, 250.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, 146, 250. And then behavior TOSA.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're allocating another 97,500 for you, for your school for counseling. Is that, do you see what I'm saying? Was that out of your general fund or last year, or was it?
No, so that would be.
Yeah, that's not
wasn't that
accurate.
12?
No, remember, the middle school also received a behavioral support allocation they have for years. And so we augmented the difference between the behavioral support that we provided, which is about $50,000, and the difference between that and a full-time counselor.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. And I guess I'm just asking that because you had mentioned that a goal that your staff wants is the social and emotional, what you have. Is it like rooms that you need, or is it like counselors that you need? It said what you do doesn't work. I'm not sure, can you clarify that?
Oh, I just
yeah.
mean, we try to adapt to every kid in every room.
Right.
But sometimes, sometimes just the traditional way of us doing
Yeah.
things just doesn't work for every kid. And so, for example, if you've ever been to the high school and seen Helen Thomas's room, I don't know if you've been there.
Yeah, several times.
I've seen something that had something in West Albany that was similar.
Right.
Building something like that into my schedule. So let's say a kid who I know just struggles with some issues and could use that, and it's the right fit, it's the right person, they would go to maybe 4 classes like they would normally, and then they end their day for 2 periods in there. Just connecting with that person, just slowing their pace down and dealing with those, their biggest struggles.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I'm talking about, where we do have a counselor that does, our 504s and tag and all the normal counseling stuff. But then just that, that Helen Thomas type person. I don't know another way to describe it. Yes. And so that's, it's just, and so many times in my career I found that we throw everything we try every single thing, and we can't figure it out, and we go, Helen. And it works. And I don't know a better way to describe that.
And her program used to be 6 through 12.
It did, correct.
Yeah. So I'm trying to recreate on a small level with what I have right now, something like that. The best
Recreate
thing.
Helen?
Yeah. Clone.
Right.
Good plan, Brett. Sounds really good. I like that. I like what you're doing. It's good to get that started at the middle school level.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brett.
Oh, can I ask one last question really quick? What are your top 3 programs
Oh,
or anything that you
yeah.
like? And I'm assuming it's logistics, space, and social emotional health.
Yeah, I mean, I would,
But I don't know, there could be something else.
Yeah, the social emotional at-risk thing
Right.
is something that is really, that I'm passionate about in this
Right.
It's really important.
Okay.
I mean, just climate culture with the school, I mean, if you want to call it school beautification, but just making it our identity is really important to me and the staff. And then just those, the opportunities, building the programs that we have at the middle school and just lining them up with the high school so that that transition is easier, because if a kid is hooked in with video tech here, and that's the only thing he's passionate about, I can hand him off right to the high school,
Right.
already plugged in, and that'll take care of so many issues that difficult freshman year has. So,
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks.
I don't see Jennifer Hannon here.
No, Jennifer's not here, and actually that's a typo. That was supposed to be my name. So Dustin Haney couldn't make it tonight because he's actually overseeing his spring production, Central House spring production at Silverton High School tonight. So if that's all right, I'll just go ahead and chime in real quick. I may not be able to answer all the questions. Yes, sorry, high school guys. I'll cover each school separately. Dustin gave me a cheat sheet though, so I hope I can answer any questions that you may have. So he wanted me to point out, beginning with Central Howell School, if you turn to the Central Howell tab, that the staffing is remaining essentially the same. The enrollment numbers are remaining essentially the same. He does have a reflection on the profile sheet for an increase in counseling. He asked me to point out that he is adding 3.5 hours per day as an assistant time, educational assistant time for reading and math interventions. You'll see that on his budget worksheet. That changed from 93,000 current year to 109,753 next year. He is also purchasing 16 iPads for the kindergarten room to make Central Howell School 100% one-to-one device, and I believe that's a new threshold for them. And he does have a planned carryover of $71,000 anticipating as reserve, anticipating increased employee costs and technology replacement over the next few years. That's Central Howell School.
Andy, do they have PE, or what are they gonna do with the mandate for PE? I don't see.
Their classroom teachers teach PE.
Do you know on their uniforms, what kind of?
Oh, I'm sorry, the uniforms, yeah, I
uniforms?
skipped over that. Yes, he put a comment here, we're purchasing new volleyball and basketball uniforms. It's been years since we've had new uniforms. So it looks like he put $2,000 in there.
Yeah.
And at Pradham, also maintaining current staffing levels and enrollment remains about the same. He is increasing PE. They do have a PE teacher at Pradham School. He's increasing that from 0.15 to 0.25. And again, that's been, similar to your question, Melissa, that's been a building-specific decision. They've chosen at Pradham School to teach PE by a licensed PE person. And frankly, I can tell you with certainty that that has occurred over time because of the availability of a retired teacher to come in and be able to offer some part-time services for that support, so it fits within their building. The adding of the counselor, and by the way, the counseling at Pradham would be 0.17, so that's equivalent to 1 day a week, and at Central Howell it's 0.34, so that's equivalent to 2 days a week. They're also purchasing new volleyball and basketball uniforms. They're adding 2 hours per day of assistant time for reading and math interventions, and they are also purchasing new student desks for the big room. That's their 6, 7, 8 combined classroom, and that value is $11,21,460. That's a $3,000 price tag. I know they were excited about that. And he also has a reserve carryover of $60,500 at Pradham.
So I noticed that he has music. He's able to put music in his schools. Is that 0.15, is that not 1 day a week or half a day or something?
I'm not certain his configuration. He does have 0.45 music at Central Howell and 0.15 music at Pradham. And so 0.15 would be the equivalent of 1 day a week, but I believe the person is in there more than 1 day a week for partial days.
Oh, okay.
Is my belief. And the 0.45 music position, I believe that person is there at least 4 days a week, possibly 5 for portions of the day.
Thank you.
That's it. And if there are any questions for Dustin, I can surely relay those to him, like your question about priorities, Shelley. I can surely ask him and ask him to respond to you.
Okay, thank you.
And most of our little schools are always pretty full and people are trying to get in them. Is that true?
Yes, we, in fact, I just signed denial forms for in-district or out-of-district transfers to Pradham School today. It's already full for next year.
What is the maximum number that students are at Pradham?
About 80.
Right.
Thanks, Andy.
You bet.
Thank you.
James and Wade.
Andy, what is outdoor school? What program is that at Central Health?
Let me find out where you are, Charles.
What does that category mean?
Outdoor school is an educational opportunity provided for our 5th or 6th graders, depending upon which grade level they choose. And that is, which line item do you see
First
that?
page in your,
Oh, outdoor school,
Yeah.
okay. It's $1,000 that he budgets there for his 5th or 6th graders to go to outdoor school every year, which is actually a state-funded grant, non-competitive grant that's provided as per Measure 99, which was approved by the voters last fall, to fund outdoor education for all schools in Oregon. So that's, I believe this $1,000 augments the grant that we get from the state of Oregon for outdoor school. And Dustin would have to tell you specifically, but all of our elementary schools participate in outdoor school. They take kids for multiple days to camps to learn outdoor school, natural resource, educational opportunities for them.
It's not a school garden or
No,
something like that.
no, it's outdoors. It's a place you go.
This is like a Boy Scout camp.
Yeah.
It's only like 3 days or so to take it usually
It's
off
very,
cycle.
it's really a unique program. It's good.
Fun time, I remember 6th grade.
All right. Good evening. Wade Locker, principal at the high school. This is James Rice. He's our athletic director. I'm going to be as brief as I can, go over the high school budget here, and then I'll turn it over to James and let him discuss those sorts of things. Our process was relatively simple. We were focusing on a few goals. One, graduating 100% of our students, graduating them being career and or college ready, giving them equal access to our educational programs, trying to build up our technology and ultimately address the needs of our students based on the forecasting that we had for this year. Our staffing is going to stay roughly the same. We are going to be adding a .33 with Josh Charted, our mechanical technology. That is actually current right now. He is a 1.0 at this point right now. And that's just going to remain the same for next year. So you will see that increase from the 17-18 budget to the 18-19 budget from the roughly 63,000 to the 1.0 97.5. So you will see that. The other major increases in our budget are going to reflect two things. One, you'll notice in our technology, we're bumping that budget up by about $11,000. Ultimately, I'd like to do more than that. Ultimately, we may do more than that with our contingency dollars. But we are trying to get closer to 1-to-1 every year as well. At this point right now, we're about 1-to-4. And that puts us well below where we would like to be with our technology. So we're going to start spending some money to get more laptops, primarily Chromebooks in our students' hands as well. The other major increase you're going to see we're eliminating class fees for our students this year, and that's reflective of us trying to give our students equal access to our programs. Every year we spend, or our students spend $25,000 to $30,000 to fund programs via student fees. Some of them are in the health and PE department, some of them are in the art department for ceramics and what have you, supplies. We're eliminating those fees altogether to make sure that our students have access to those fees. So you will see, to those classes, and equal access to those classes. So you will see major increases in, say, the arts, where there's a $10,000 increase in supplies. You'll see a major increase in the instrumental music, where there's things that are covered by fees. So what have you. You would see that most of the increases that you would see in supply areas would normally be covered by student fees. We're increasing those budgets to make sure that we can cover that. There are a couple of areas that the budget will remain the same, but we expect to go down a little bit next year. They are classes that are associated with extracurricular activities. that right now, for instance, robotics. It is a class, but it's also associated with an extracurricular activity. Right now, we are going to continue to fund their involvement in those extracurricular activities. Next year, we are going to say, you guys need to fundraise, as you are an extracurricular outside activity. You're going to need to fundraise your entry fees, those sorts of things, just like we do for any other extracurricular program. They're paid for through ASB, those sorts of things. Speech and debate is another one, kind of along the same lines. There is an OSAA speech and debate program activity. We have an ASB, we have a speech and debate team. They pay all their entry fees, but our speech class also requires kids to be involved in those activities. And we fund that through our general fund. In the future, that's not going to happen. The speech and debate program is going to have to fund that for those kids because they are competing for our speech and debate program when they go to those competitions. So those are going to be the primary increases. For health occupations, they generally spend, the students will generally buy their own books for the health occupations class. That comes out to the tune of about $1,900 a year. We're adding that in. Again, student fees is trying to cover those sorts of things. So, we are going to have a carryover at the end of the year. I can't give you any real good reason as to why we said $145,000 is going to be the reserve for the following year and $30,804 is going to be the contingency fund. But that's what we ended up doing, hoping that next year we'll have a little bit of a cushion going into the beginning of the year and just have that sitting there waiting for us. I believe that those funds over the previous couple of years are what allowed us to be able to absorb those student fees for this year. So that's one of the big pluses for us.
What is your current graduation rate?
We were at 90?
89.4.
Yeah, it was right up in the 90, that 90%
And the
range.
state average is?
74%.
Below that, yes.
And I'd just like to add, many high schools have multiple high schools. So when they, like Oregon City says we have a 92% graduation rate, that does not include their alt-ed high school.
Right.
Ours includes our alt-ed high school.
Correct.
So it's a big deal, yeah.
And I think it is important to reiterate the fact that we have a freshman class that has the potential to be on track 100% to graduate by the time they go into their sophomore year. I think that's an important thing to reiterate.
Exceptional.
So we talk about what we're getting from the middle school. I think that's a solid product and what we believe we're doing for them is consistent with that. So.
Wade, what are you going to do about Helen's program?
Yeah, for the middle school.
It's going to look different. I mean, there's just...
What'd you say?
We're locking her in the room.
Yeah, really.
We are...
She just thinks she's retired.
We're going to search high and low to find somebody that can continue that program. It's going to look different no matter what.
Of course.
It's going to look different. We understand the value of Helen. It was funny talking about the behavior issues and these sorts of things. We have students that are at odds with one another over who gets to spend time with Helen. And it's she does a lot for our kids.
Yeah, she does.
She's a pretty incredible lady.
She's
so
going to be missed. But
she will be.
It'll work.
Yeah. You're right. Other questions? James?
I have a.
Please, yeah.
Oh, I thought you were talking. I thought you raised your hand. Sorry. So just a few questions. On the very first page of your line item here, under salaries, it's 0.67 for FTE list. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not what I want. I'm sorry, down below, it's the last line item in section 1 of salaries and associated payroll costs. It's the total hours student info / data support.
Mhm.
Can you just kind of elaborate on that?
Why that's going down so much?
Yeah.
Measure 98 is going to end up funding a lot of that for us. So it's just basically, we're moving that. So with Heidi's position. So,
Okay, good. Yeah, I was.
So they're going to pick up a lot. Measure 98 is going to pick up a lot.
Sweet. Okay.
Student Success Fund.
And then on the second page, under high school programs, social studies, you have personal finance workbooks, went from 5,000 to none. And then adoption workbook, book repairs, are you getting some new?
The high school is looking at, over the summer, changing the personal finance curriculum. They didn't feel like they were getting their bang for their buck there, and what they wanted to do is funnel that money instead into technology.
Oh.
But they believe over the summer they can rewrite that personal finance curriculum and improve it, quite honestly, with what they're doing, and not have to spend the money on those books annually.
Okay.
So.
And then down in the high school programs, the arts.
Yep.
It's 3,000 to 13,000, all supplies including freight.
The majority of that's clay. I mean, it's clay, right? It's
and
clay. It's
that's a
canvases.
significant increase,
It's
so
yeah.
you're
It's,
increasing quite a bit in the arts
so
department.
and that's the big one, right? I mean, what it costs for those students to take those classes is really the cost of those supplies on an annual basis.
Right.
So that's what it is. It's clay, it's canvases, it's paints, it's brushes, it's.
Is that new for this year?
We're absorbing that fee.
I see.
That we are absorbing that student fee.
So probably everything I've highlighted
We don't-
here, you're absorbing the fee.
Yeah, we don't want
okay.
kids to not be able to take ceramics because they can't afford a $40 or $30 fee there.
Okay.
And like I said, the previous principals have done a good, a strong enough job of budgeting and for the future that with that, with those carryovers from previous years, we feel like we can absorb that this year right now.
So that's the same with family consumer studies, that increases 6,000.
Correct.
And then
So that's
ag-
right, that's baking powder, that's
Yeah.
flour, that's, yeah.
And ag increased 7,000.
Could I add something to that?
Please.
Yeah.
There's been a recent ruling from ODE that it is no longer allowable for high school programs to be charging kids fees.
It's illegal.
For classes that
It's
they
illegal,
need to
yeah.
access for graduation credit. So electives, you have to have elective credit to graduate with your diploma. So many districts are trying to now figure out how to cover those.
That makes sense.
So that makes a lot of sense. The
It
one
does.
other question I had was
It's
there
an equity argument.
software increase of 11,000
Where, yeah.
for tech ed, is that the same?
Yeah, that's, did it software, did it say software? That is, we're gonna be purchasing Chromebooks and technology with that. That's the idea. We're trying, and hopefully that number's low. I might want to dip into the contingency to actually get more than what $11,000 is gonna get us. So, that's a conservative estimate.
Thanks for keeping the $2,000 in the drama department this year. I know that this school year, they've really appreciated that. And you know how good our drama department is, and Mr. O, and all the time those kids put in. So thanks for keeping that in the budget for next year.
You know, we're gonna try and keep as many of our extracurricular programs thriving as we possibly can. I think that's a big deal. The more opportunities our kids have to connect, much like Brett was saying before, the more opportunities our kids have to connect, the more opportunities they have to be successful. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So.
Is personal finance an actual class again, or is it a part of a class?
That's an actual class.
Okay, it
Yeah.
used to be, and then for years they weren't teaching it.
They've got to take personal finance.
Okay.
About 6 years ago, we added this as a half credit requirement for high school graduation from Silverton
Nice.
High School. Yeah, yeah.
Good.
Nice addition.
So, question about music and band. So, we don't have a lot of, are you seeing kids coming from the lower schools and the rural schools coming in who are entering into those programs with the teachers that we have now that are teaching music in our rural schools and instruments? I'm just trying to, what I'm trying to do is get a visual of a kids that are playing a band instrument of some kind throughout the years and then coming to your high school and having that program.
Are you asking about the feeder programs? Like what's
Yeah,
feeding
kind
in
of
the
the
high
feeder.
school?
Do you have, is that going
It's-
well? Are you seeing?
You know, it's difficult for me to assess in
Okay.
year one. That's
Okay.
so I appreciate the question, but that's difficult for me to answer after year one.
Okay.
I think our band and choir programs are outstanding.
They are.
I want them to
They
continue to
really
be
are.
outstanding.
Yeah, they're
And so we're, we are committed to maintaining our current staffing at that point,
Okay.
with where we're at this point right now, and always hoping to grow those programs. So,
Right.
yeah.
So a follow-up, just students who are not able to participate during school in a music or band program, because some of our schools don't have that.
Right.
Do they have a chance with the current funding level to participate in band?
And like a beginning.
Yeah, they're a beginning band for kids who've
At
never
the high
paid.
school?
Yes.
Yes.
Who've never
Okay.
paid. So
Yes.
this covers
There's
that.
there's a beginning band at the high school.
I think that, I
Yeah.
think.
Is that what you're asking?
I think that's what I was asking,
Okay.
yeah. I think
Okay.
I just want to have this vision of, you receiving kids for these programs from our schools.
Right.
And I didn't know what you had been seeing or, but they're all really successful. And I want to keep it that way, looking at the elementary level, even theater, all of that. I want it to be successful for them when they get up there. So I'm just, so.
Yeah. No, I
So
understand.
beginning band, okay.
I think we call it Fox bands.
There's a ton of them.
Yeah.
There's a fox band, there's jazz band, there's.
Concert choir, there's
It
choir
is,
ensemble, there's
it's
percussion,
just-
yeah.
It's
Yeah, we have a lot.
incredible how that program has exploded, and now we have a marching band,
We do have a marching band.
which hasn't been at Silverton High School for 10 years.
They had one when my kids were here.
What's that?
Right, yeah, when Melissa was
We
here.
had a marching band when I was in high
Yes,
school.
Oh, you did?
it was wonderful. It was
It
wonderful.
was wonderful, yeah. Well, it was just really fun going to the football games and seeing them on the football
Yeah.
field. It was like, oh my God.
Yeah, we had a flag team.
Yes.
My daughter was on it.
Right, they started that too, so,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to
Things
ask.
change.
questions
You bet.
and see that they're continuing that.
What
Thank
what
you.
is your curriculum for family and consumer study?
The family and consumer study, it's like our culinary program. So the curriculum is, I think we
How
have
are you training master chef?
Well, I mean, you're gonna ask me what we want. Ultimately, that's what we would like, is to create a pathway there with culinary. I mean, we want to expand our opportunities for our kids to go out into the real world and be ready to go out into the real world. So yeah, that is part of it. An engineering pathway would be nice. And nice to have, social worker, mental health worker, and we've begun working on relationships to make that a reality. So I'm going to jump ahead of your question and say those are
Great.
some of the big needs.
Okay,
So this used to be called home ec, is that?
Yes. I mean, that's essentially what this, I'm correct, so that's the home ec track, right? Yeah.
This is a full-blown noun thing.
You're doing a good job with it.
Doing a good job of the noun thing.
You're testing it. Other questions?
All right, first of all, thank you for having me tonight. For the athletic budget specifically, the one change that you are going to see, the only change that I made was reflective on the coaches' stipends. That's the only change that I made. In terms of the CBA increases, and we do have a couple coaching positions that we will need to hire for. But besides that, that's the only increase you are going to see. So if you kind of go line by line, I had a good person in front of me last year, I guess. But a couple things that I wanted to point out specifically, down at the very bottom on transportation, Steve and I looked, it was last week, that 50,000, so this is going to be through the month of April. We're sitting at about 36 right now. And so we are right on track with that. The one thing that I think for folks to see is that we have coaches that on a weekly basis drive kids. And so although that amount is rock solid and I think we're fine there, I think it is a kudos to our coaches too, that maybe going into a season, a lot of folks don't know that, but that does go on, as these folks over here know. The other things that I think are important to point out, for example, dance studio rental. In the winter months with our basketballs and wrestling and everything that is going on, we don't have enough gym space to get our dance team into our gyms. We just do not have space. So we have to basically rent space outside of our facilities for our dance team to perform. Happens to be that our dance coach owns a dance studio as well. So if there were some questions there, that's what that is for. Along the same lines, the pool rental, we were well under the 9,000 this year, and we actually they offered us some additional lane and pool time at the end of the year going into our district and state meets, because we had so many kids that did qualify. We got to use a little bit more pool time at the end of the year. So that was great.
So the dance studio rental, does that only happen during the winter season?
Yes. That's when we try to isolate that for them. In springtime, they're done with state. In fall, we have the volleyballs in there, but the gym space isn't quite as used.
A couple questions. So there's no girls' golf. Is that just lack of interest?
So we actually, and Wade can probably speak to this a little bit from last year, we actually have a golf team, and that coach and assistant both take care of the boys and the girls. So, yeah.
That's, we had enough students that were interested in golf over the last couple of years that we decided to make the proposal to put that back into the athletic budget last year, but knowing that coach was probably going to have to take care of both teams. And so we hired a head coach and an assistant coach, knowing that they could split those duties, and that's how we decided to go about it.
In soccer, I noticed there's only one assistant coach for the boys, so are their numbers way down?
Their numbers have been down. We had a new coach last year. We're hoping with his second year things will kind of spike back up a bit. And I think depending on the numbers for next fall, we'll kind of determine where we go with that.
That makes me sad.
What's the difference between
I
the two
used to
teams?
coach Brett.
You coach Brett?
Yeah, he's one of my
But one
kids.
stories.
And then I have one other question. So I noticed for coaching girls basketball, we get paid less than coaching boys basketball. I just wondered about that.
Part of the CBA. That's what is in the CBA now.
It's based on years of experience.
Is it?
So the
Okay.
boys coach may have more years of
Okay.
experience
I
than
wondered
the
if it.
women.
Yeah, they get the same pay, basically.
Okay.
It's just the different years
Yeah,
of
I just kind of
experience.
wondered, that's interesting.
So I notice you have a category for student insurance, and you haven't put any budget into that category. What would that include?
If we were to put something in there to where our students must prove or have insurance to participate, we provide an opportunity for them to purchase their own through the school, but we don't actually pay for that.
So if they're, a hot topic now is football injuries.
Absolutely.
How is that covered by the school district?
I'm guessing at one point that line item was in there because we did pay for some insurance at some point.
I can't recall ever having any line item for insurance.
Okay.
Parents are required to have insurance for their child to participate in school athletics. And school district responsibility really only comes into play if we're taking a task, if there's negligence or if there's a lawsuit or something of that sort. Otherwise, if a child gets injured in a sport, it's the responsibility of the parents.
Right.
What is game dance supervision?
So
Is that just
when
teachers supervising?
yes,
Oh.
exactly. So when we have a football game and we have
Okay. I'm like, okay. Where's I'm sorry, but I can't find the stipend for the differencing. The first thing that you said, that's the only thing that's different.
So if you
Where
look
is it?
for the 17-18 budget proposal and the 18-19, just
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
increase.
Looking at pay increases, and that's just cost of living adjustments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for James? All right, Wade, James, thanks.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Well, at this time, I kind of already gave the guidelines earlier. Now that we've heard all the principals' budgets, we have time for audience with visitors. Would anybody like to?
Erin, we didn't hear from Silvercrest, was that?
Silvercrest will occur at the next meeting. Sorry, Mark Hanna was not available tonight.
Okay, just was like,
Yeah, no, that's a good catch.
Thank you. I didn't think I missed anything on the agenda, but thank you.
He's also responsible for district level things, so he's going to present those at the same time.
Okay, got it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So if anybody would like to talk to Rachel.
Sarah Wexman, Silverton. I just have a couple quick things. I just want to say thank you for the binder. That was fabulous. I've been coming to this meeting, I think, for 3 or 4 years now, and having a guest binder was just wonderful because I was prepared to be like following along on board book, which I'm also super thankful and excited to have that available to us. So that's just fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie, for getting all those together.
Also, I really just wanted to say thank you to those of you who asked questions. And I know it's 10 o'clock and I know it's a really late night and it's a long meeting, but this is an important meeting and it's important to ask all these questions. And I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for all the questions because I thought that they were all insightful and informative and things that we don't always think about, and I really appreciate it. My third and final comment is that, mostly directed to the school board members, that I've said this in the past, that I just wanted to remind you of your board goals, which were to maintain current programs and staffing. And I know that Scotts Mills was a donated sum of money last year for music, but it was also reported that we have a 14% reserve in our district, which is sizable, and I know that we had goals for our reserve because of course and other things, but it doesn't, you won't meet your goal, I guess, if you aren't able to maintain that program out there because it's cut now, which we've had now 3 years of significant cuts in music. So I just wanted to say that. And also for maybe those of you who are new, like Charles, like with the, again, this year, and I'm sure, you guys have been talking about it for years, about the PE. And thankfully they, rolled it over another 3 years. But when I kept hearing in my, PE mandate, we're preparing for the mandate, but the mandate's not here yet. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And one thing that really caught my ear this evening also was Mark Twain's budget and that significant and sizable FTE increase for the educational assistants, is that what they're called? And one thing that Principal Kotz said, was that those kids really need sensory activities. And that just caught my eye because that was one of the schools that we cut music at 3 years ago, and there's lots of research about music education and helping with those types of things in the younger kids. And I know that the budget committee can't direct programs, I understand that, but the school board, you guys can have input on that, and before you adopt the final budget, I hope you have some good conversations about that. So thank you for the late night, and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for sticking around.
Okay, next item, it would be establishing dates for our next meeting. I think we already have one set for May 10th, which we'll hear from special services, some of the title programs, also from Mark.
You'll hear the superintendent message that night as well, budget message. You'll also hear the superintendent board budget request that night as well, entitled, in fact, I do want to remind you, not remind you, but tell you that you'll hear custodial maintenance. There are still 3 budget worksheets that are being developed. Custodial maintenance, technology, and special services. And you will receive those electronically prior to the meeting. We're targeting splitting today and the 10th, so about a week and a half from now you should be receiving those electronically, so you'll have a good week and a half or so to review those before you get them, and then you'll receive hard copies on that night. And of course, if anybody wants hard copies, just let Debbie know and she'll get those to you right away.
Just a process note, I ended up staying home today because my child was sick and I was able to thoroughly read through the budget.
Great.
I would not have been able to probably if it was, I went to work today and I think that could be improved. I think there's an improvement opportunity next year when we do this, that the budget sheets come out to us, you know, before.
Like a week ahead.
Yeah, like we get very helpful. So we can plan for a weekend
It
to
would
be
be
able to
really
review it.
Sure.
Yeah, and was there notice that they were ready today? Because I saw your post on Facebook, and that was the only way I knew that they were there. So then I spent an hour or two reading everything.
We've sent a couple of emails out. You should have received emails. I sent a letter out about a month ago as
That
well.
one, yes, but notifying that the budget sheets were actually available today.
Yes, those were sent out in an email about a week ago on board book to all the budget committee board members.
It was
in the
noted
packet.
in the letter that they would be placed on board book, so you had to go to board book.
I went to board book like when that came out. And
No,
they
it
were
was
there.
just
It's in the agenda
yesterday.
and packet on the board book if you click on it.
Yeah, but it
Now
just
it's-
was put up yesterday. But it
Yes,
wasn't-
it was noon yesterday that we targeted to have everything ready
Okay,
to
so
go.
maybe a process note, like a notification, it's there now, because I did not, I went the first time, but I didn't remember to go
Okay.
back today until I saw it on Facebook.
I want to compliment the district staff. Debbie sent me all the notification I needed and reminded me. It was very helpful, thank you. Steve has given me all the background that I needed and asked for, and that was very helpful as well. I do share the view that the information that was put online yesterday was very short notice for tonight's meeting. And if the meeting schedule, I don't know what our constraints are with regard to adopting a final budget, but waiting 30 days for the second meeting may not be necessary. I'd be very happy to have met 2 weeks from now and then 2 weeks following the second meeting and so on. If the schedule could be worked out that way, it probably would give us more time to study the budget.
Yeah, it's up to you as a group. I mean, the meeting time is established. If the majority of this group wants to set another meeting and have a couple of meetings, we can surely do that. Charles, I think it would take some orchestration to try to do that. We use the 2 dates, and we've had months notification of the 2 dates tonight and May 10th just for that purpose. But it ultimately is up to the budget committee to determine if you need another meeting and would like some.
It seems to be, maybe
Other
we
way to
should
do
look
this.
at this way and say, you know, we have a May 10th meeting. At that point, if we need another meeting, I think we can probably agree to set something if we had to. But I generally, the last few cycles, at least that I've been through, we've been able to get through it pretty thoroughly in two meetings. But I think it'd probably be best let's see how the 10th goes, let's see how that rolls, and then if we need to, we can add a meeting on if needed.
Do we have a statutory deadline to adopt the budget?
You do.
What date is that?
June 30th.
June, yeah.
That's board adoption of the budget.
Of the June meeting. usually,
Correct.
yeah.
There's no statutory requirement for budget committee approval of the budget. It just needs to be submitted to the board sufficient time so the board can adopt it by June 30th.
We can give you 1 day notice the way you give us.
So the regular board meeting in June would be the 4th? Is that right? Or is it
It's the second.
It's the second.
That would be 11th.
Can we call a special meeting if needed?
I think we have the freedom after the 10th, we can add a meeting, yeah.
We can add a special
We can do.
meeting to an emergency meeting or whatever.
No, it's not an emergency meeting. It would just be an extra budget committee meeting.
I just wanted to get the
Sure.
verbiage right, so
Right.
I'm just asking Aaron that.
Sure. You know,
Sure.
I'm assuming too that tonight's meeting is going to be broadcast.
It will be.
It'll be rebroadcast, so if there's any questions, concerns, comments, we can always go back and do another session individually if you need an extra help. And then by the time we revisit what's already going to be broadcast, between tonight's notes, if we do need that extra meeting, I can see that. But I mean, the resources are there already for us.
I'll kind of piggyback on what we've heard too about some extra time, I do think it would be better to give some more time. I'll reference it because I'm on the city budget committee, and we get our binder pretty far in advance of the first meeting. I think 2 to 3 weeks, and granted that budget's quite a bit thicker, but I think maybe if at least we had a week before the meeting to at least peel through it at minimum, I think that'd probably be more ideal. And I know we're kind of norming on some new systems with board books and trying to be more efficient. We're taking great strides, I already can say, in seeing 2 previous cycles and now seeing this one. But I think I think that'd be more adequate.
Yeah, I'm certain we can facilitate that. We've, I think, over time have taken a little bit longer just simply for accuracy, and we find that some changes happen. As an example, special education budget, couldn't prepare it. We're still doing early intervention childhood meetings. Even this room was full of community members and preschool parents and kids today to try to figure out what our special education budget is going to be for next year. Custodial maintenance, the same thing. We're waiting on bids and contractors and a variety of things that are still unknown. School budgets, we could probably get a week or 2 earlier. I think we can manage that.
Yeah, I think it's been a fine, I'm trying to balance, giving the principals enough time to meet with their staff and get parental input through their process. And, I think giving them as much time as we can has been helpful, as evidenced by what they're able to share tonight. But I also understand you need more time to, to go through it. So I just think we'll just take a look at that timeline between February and today, how we can cinch it up a little bit.
Well, I certainly don't want to put any more pressure on those employees because I know that they're working very diligently, but are we constrained by this date?
We are during a legislative year, absolutely.
Okay.
So we have intentionally tried to create budgets as...
By what date though? You mean by this meeting
like
date
today,
specifically?
Yes.
No, I mean just that we have it on April,
That
the
could be,
third week of April.
that part could be flexed either way, right?
It could be, but that's the point I was making, is during a legislative year, it's very difficult to know. When we truly, it's a shot in the dark during a legislative year about how much money we're going to get. In fact, in some years, we've had literally 3 scenarios of, well, if we get this much funding, this is what it'll be, if they get this much funding, and it can be quite challenging.
But we don't necessarily have to have the first budget committee meeting date in the third week of April, no. It could be, we can do the first and third week of May, we could wait until the start, beginning of May to try to have the first one, or keep it now and just make sure we put a little tighter constraint on the front end process. Because it is quite a bit of work, but it's also a lot of work for you to read through it too, so. So we'll find a happy medium for sure. I think the delivery is nice because I think, again, with the board book, that's a huge tool. And before it was, come pick up the notebook on a day or 2 before, or you don't get it until you come. Now it's all pushed out electronically, and you can still come get the notebook if you want to before. But
Yeah, and I like to get the notebook
Yeah.
because I mark mine
Yeah.
all up.
But if there's changes
So,
or,
yeah.
things that happen, it's easy to push things out.
I think it's important to note that you've got 3 brand new principals, or one who's just in his second year, and its budget is very scary.
Yeah.
Like, they want to get it right, they're even in here on Monday asking, okay, why, and so it's...
And spring breaks in there when they're
Yeah.
trying to build it, and they lose a little momentum. And, I have several meetings with several of them through the whole process. So, it's...
They'll get better.
Yeah.
They're gonna get, that part will get streamlined.
I think they did phenomenal.
Yeah, I was gonna say, these things don't come
did.
together extremely
They
easy.
were...
I think you guys are doing fine on your
There's a
timelines.
lot of stress behind the scenes.
Yeah.
How do I say it? What
For
do I
the first
say?
and second year principals.
And you guys are
they
doing
did
fine
a
on your
great job.
timelines, because especially the way we budget our district, a lot of it's just laid out, and it's pretty simple to understand, so I think you're doing fine.
This is my first meeting that I've participated in, and I just want to say that I'm grateful that you are open to having us ask questions about the pedagogy as well, because I think it's important to know what we're funding when we're budgeting, not just comparing year to year, and not asking questions about why and how the education is actually being delivered. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. And similar to your comment, Charles, I encourage you to also, you're welcome to follow-up phone calls with principals if there are any clarifying questions about that. Because the pedagogy is different in some of our schools, clearly just because of models and and facilities even, you're welcome to follow up with them.
One other comment I'd make, I've done this for 17 years now, and this Silver Falls is my third school district, so Santiam Canyon, really small, Corvallis for a few years, larger than Silver Falls. This is the first district I've seen where the principals actually come and present to the budget committee and present school level budget. So it's a little different in a way that we actually start at maybe a 5,000 foot level. We're down pretty deep, and but it does allow us to get in the conversations and the Q&A that we got in tonight, which I think is very helpful. And then we get some more detail with departments at the next meeting, but then we're looking at that kind of appropriation level style of the budget. But in these other districts, that's what you start with, and it's a lot harder to really understand what's going on at the schools, like what we got tonight. So I think there's a lot of value to this, and I think it became kind of a natural way to do things here, just because they were all separate districts, and the school level reporting was still very important here. Not all districts are the same in how they do that, so I think there's a lot of value.
Yeah,
to
Steve,
that.
I completely agree with that. I know it's a lot more work for the principals to do that,
Yeah.
but it's really important. I think it's wonderful.
Well, and I think it also creates a communication level
Mhm.
between board members, budget committee members, superintendent. It's important to keep that conversation going amongst all of us.
Right.
So we're in the.
It's not just a
as much-
2-meeting process, it's a
It's
year-long
not,
conversation.
right, exactly, yeah, but I think it's healthy
Yeah.
for
Oh, I agree.
that to
No,
happen.
I think it's great.
And it's promising and positive and proactive, so we're fortunate.
Well, so just on the horizon, we got May 10th, 7 o'clock, back here.
Right here.
And then at that point, if there's anything needed, we can send out a date and time. So,
And in the meantime, if we do have questions, we talk to you, because you're the
Sure.
chairperson, right?
Sure.
Okay.
No.
Because, we might get questions from people who see the broadcast or
Sure.
see it on board docs.
I'll help
One
triage
thing that would
anything.
help
you
me
need.
administratively, if you could send a communication sheet,
Yeah,
the names and the email addresses of all the
Right.
members that are here.
I
So
was just
we need
gonna ask that,
to, I don't know Aaron and I don't know his email address, but.
Got it.
we have the
Anyway.
board member emails, but we don't have the
Yeah,
budget
we'll take care of
committee
that.
member
That makes sense.
emails or contact information. That's a big question.
Yeah, what's that?
Just emails or phone numbers.
Emails, will that be sufficient, Charles? Okay.
That'll work.
Everybody okay with that? Okay, yeah, it's your personal email addresses.
So if we don't, anything else, if we don't have anything else, then we can adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.